Hello there, and welcome to Tired Thinker, where curiosity slows down and the mind takes its time. Tonight, we'll wander through something unseen, subtle, and endlessly persuasive: psychological illusions. These are the tricks of the mind that shape how we see the world, how we make decisions, and even how we see ourselves. From the way we remember events, to the choices we think are our own, to the beliefs we hold without question, these illusions are always at work. They influence your thoughts, your habits, your interactions, and the stories you tell yourself about reality. Before we dive into this quiet exploration of the mind's hidden patterns, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now in your little corner of the world? It's strange, isn't it? A video about illusions, and here we are, scattered across the globe, each of us gently guided by the same invisible forces. If you find this slow, thoughtful look at the mind soothing, or if you're just here to rest your thoughts after a long day, I'd be so grateful if you gave the video a like or softly subscribed. It helps this tired little channel reach others who might need a calm moment to reflect on the curious ways our minds shape reality. Now, let's begin. Selective attention bias happens when the brain focuses on certain things while ignoring others. This process works like a filter. The brain receives far more information than it can handle at once. It must choose what to notice and what to ignore. Without this filter, everyday life would feel overwhelming. You would notice every sound, every color, every movement, and every detail in your surroundings, all at the same time. This would make it very hard to make decisions or take action. The filter helps you stay focused and efficient. It lets you pay attention to what you think matters most. However, this same filter can lead to blind spots. Important details might slip past without you realizing it. These missed details can affect your judgment and your understanding of events. For example, imagine you are driving and focused on finding a street sign. Because of this focus, you might not notice a cyclist approaching from the side. Even though the cyclist was in your line of sight, your brain did not process it because it was too busy looking for the sign. This shows how selective attention bias can make you unaware of things that are right in front of you. Another example comes from everyday conversations. If you are at a busy cafe talking with a friend, your brain tunes out the noise around you so you can hear what your friend says. This is helpful most of the time, but if someone nearby says your name, your brain suddenly notices. This sudden shift proves that the brain hears much more than you are aware of, but only brings certain things to your attention when they seem important. Selective attention bias also plays a role in work environments. Imagine a manager reviewing a report. If the manager expects to find problems with sales numbers, they may focus only on data that supports that belief. They might miss other information like positive customer feedback that gives a fuller picture. This happens because the brain is wired to focus on what matches expectations or current goals. In this way, selective attention can reinforce existing beliefs and prevent people from seeing the whole truth. This bias shows up strongly during stressful situations. Under pressure, the brain narrows its focus even more. It tries to block out distractions to handle the urgent problem. While this can be useful, it also raises the risk of missing critical signals. For example, a doctor in an emergency room may focus so hard on treating one symptom that they overlook another sign pointing to a different diagnosis. The missed detail could lead to an error in treatment. Experiments in psychology have shown how powerful this effect can be. One famous study asked people to watch a video of players passing the basketball and count the passes. While the viewers counted, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene. Many viewers never noticed the gorilla at all. Their brains filtered it out because they were so focused on counting passes. This experiment demonstrates how selective attention can make people blind to things that are obvious once pointed out. Technology can increase the effects of selective attention bias. Smartphones, constant notifications, and multitasking split focus into many parts. The brain jumps between tasks quickly, but processes each one less deeply. This can create more blind spots. For instance, checking a phone while walking can make someone miss a step or bump into another person. The brain chooses to focus on the screen, leaving less awareness for the physical environment. In high-stakes fields like aviation or surgery, professionals receive special training to counter this bias. Pilots use checklists to make sure they do not miss important steps during flight. Surgeons often work in teams where members double-check each other's work. These strategies aim to widen attention and reduce the chance of missing key details. Selective attention also shapes how people see news and information. If someone believes a certain opinion, their brain pays more attention to stories that match that view. It may ignore or forget stories that challenge it. This creates a loop where people become more convinced of their beliefs over time, because they only notice information that supports them. This process contributes to misunderstandings and conflicts in society. A simple everyday scenario shows how this works. Suppose you believe your neighbor is unfriendly. The next time you see them, you notice when they fail to say hello. You might not notice when they smile or wave. Your brain filters for behavior that fits your belief and discards behavior that does not. Over time, this reinforces your view, even if it is not accurate. The human brain evolved selective attention as a survival tool. Early humans needed to notice predators or food while ignoring unimportant background details. This ability allowed quick decisions and better chances of staying alive. In modern life, the same system still operates, but the threats and goals have changed. Now, instead of predators, the focus might be on a work deadline or a social interaction. Awareness of this bias can help reduce its effects. When you understand that your attention has limits, you can take steps to expand it. For example, you can pause before making a decision and ask what you might be missing. You can also seek input from others who may notice different things. Even simple habits like taking notes or using reminders can help catch details that slip past your filter. Selective attention bias affects everyone, regardless of skill or intelligence. Even experts in their fields are not immune. The key is not to eliminate the bias, which is impossible, but to recognize when it might be at work. By doing so, you can make more informed choices and see a more accurate picture of the world around you. Change blindness happens when you fail to notice a change in what you are looking at. The brain does not take in every detail of a scene. Instead, it builds a rough picture of what it believes is there. This picture is good enough for most daily tasks, but it leaves gaps. When something changes slowly or outside your direct focus, the brain may not register the change at all. You think you are seeing everything, but in reality, you are filling in missing pieces with assumptions. Researchers have studied this effect using simple experiments. In one well-known study, a person asks a passerby for directions. While they are talking, two people carry a large object between them. During that brief moment, the original person switches places with someone else. Many of the passers-by continue giving directions without realizing they are now speaking to a completely different person. This experiment shows how easily the brain can overlook major changes when attention is directed elsewhere. Another common experiment uses photographs. Participants see one image, then a second image that is almost the same, but with one small change, such as a missing object or a different color. A blank screen flashes between the two images. Many participants take a long time to spot the difference. This happens because the blank screen disrupts the visual flow. preventing the brain from seeing the change as movement. The brain does not compare every detail of the two images. Instead, it assumes that most things have stayed the same, so it does not notice what is different unless the change is obvious or directly relevant to the task. In everyday life, change blindness happens more often than people realize. Imagine you are driving and waiting at a red light. While you glance at your phone, the car in front of you turns right and leaves. When you look up again, you might not immediately notice the car is gone. Your brain expected the car to still be there, so it filled in that expectation rather than update the scene in real time. This split-second delay can affect how quickly you react. The effect is even stronger when you are deeply focused on one task. For example, if you are cooking dinner and paying attention to the recipe, you might not notice that someone has moved your keys from the counter to the table. Later, when you look for your keys, you feel confused because you are certain they were never moved. In reality, your brain simply failed to record the moment of change because it was busy processing something else. Change blindness can create serious problems in high-stakes situations. Pilots must monitor many instruments at once. If a gauge changes slowly, or if the change is outside their main focus, they may not notice until it is too late. In healthcare, a nurse might fail to see that a patient's monitor has shifted from normal to dangerous readings if the shift happens gradually. In these cases, missing a change can lead to harm, so systems are designed with alarms and alerts to grab attention when something important changes. The brain uses shortcuts to process information quickly. These shortcuts are useful most of the time, but they leave people vulnerable to missing changes. When you enter a room, your brain does not analyze every detail. It notices key features like where the furniture is, who is present, and whether anything seems out of place. Once it builds this mental map, it stops paying close attention to most of the details. If something in the background changes while you are focused on a conversation or a task, you may not notice because your brain assumes the scene is stable. Gradual changes are especially hard to detect. If a wall slowly shifts color over several hours, you may never notice. Your brain updates its mental map little by little, blending each small change into the overall picture. This is why people sometimes fail to notice when a friend has grown a beard or changed their hairstyle over time. They see the person often, and the change happens in small steps, so their brain does not mark it as new information. Change blindness also affects memory. You may believe you would remember a major change clearly, but your memory depends on what you actually noticed at the time. If you never notice the change, your memory fills in the missing pieces with guesses. This can lead to false confidence. In court cases, eyewitnesses may be certain about what they saw, even if a change happened right in front of them and went unnoticed. This makes change blindness a serious concern in legal settings where accurate observation matters. An everyday example of this happens in offices. Imagine a coworker places a report on your desk while you are focused on an email. You glance at the report without really processing it. Later, when you need the report, you might accuse someone of moving it because you do not remember seeing it arrive. The report never moved, but you failed to register the moment it appeared. This simple mistake shows how easily change blindness can create misunderstandings. Technology can make this issue worse. People often switch between screens on phones, computers, and tablets. When attention jumps rapidly, the brain has even less capacity to notice changes. For instance, while toggling between browser tabs, you might miss that an important message has appeared in one window. Designers of safety-critical software try to solve this by using color changes, flashing alerts, or sounds to grab attention. Without these signals, subtle changes might go unnoticed. The phenomenon also plays a role in security and fraud. Magicians exploit change blindness to perform tricks. While the audience focuses on one hand, the other hand makes a change that goes unseen. Thieves may use similar tactics, creating a distraction so you focus on one thing while they act elsewhere. The brain's limits make these tricks possible. Even when you believe you are paying attention, being aware of change blindness can help reduce its effects. When you know your attention has limits, you can take steps to slow down and scan your surroundings more carefully. Pilots and surgeons rely on checklists for this reason. A checklist forces you to look at each item instead of assuming everything is as expected. In daily life, you can build similar habits, like double-checking locks or rereading messages before sending them. Consider a situation where you park your car in a large lot. If you are distracted while parking, you may later forget where you left it. The car has not moved, but your brain never recorded its exact location. To prevent this, you might pause for a moment, look around, and take note of landmarks. This extra step creates a clear memory and reduces the chance of confusion later. Change blindness shows that seeing is not the same as noticing. The eyes take in information, but the brain decides what to keep and what to ignore. By understanding how this process works, you can recognize moments when you might be missing something important. This awareness can improve safety, communication, and decision-making in many parts of life. Inattentional blindness happens when you fail to see something right in front of you because your focus is locked on another task. The brain has limits on how much information it can process at one time. When all of your attention is directed at a single activity, there is little room left for anything else. As a result, even clear and obvious events can go unnoticed. You believe you are fully aware of your surroundings, but your brain is filtering out details that do not seem important in that moment. One of the most famous studies showing this effect is called the invisible gorilla experiment. In this study, people watched a video of two teams passing basketballs. Viewers were told to count the number of passes made by one team. While they focused on counting, a person in a gorilla suit walked into the scene, stopped in the middle, beat their chest, and then walked off. Afterward, many viewers were shocked to learn about the gorilla because they had not seen it at all. Their attention was so focused on the counting task that the unexpected event never registered in their minds. This experiment reveals a simple truth. Attention is selective. When you focus on one thing, you ignore many others without realizing it. Inattentional blindness is not about poor eyesight or lack of effort. It happens because the brain has to prioritize. It treats the focused task as the most important and pushes other information aside. Everyday life offers many examples of this effect. Imagine you are writing an important email at work. You are concentrating on choosing the right words and making sure there are no mistakes. While you type, a coworker walks past your desk, waves, and says hello. You might not see or hear them at all because your brain is locked onto the email. Later, your coworker may mention that you ignored them, and you will be surprised because you never noticed their presence. Driving is another situation where inattentional blindness can have serious consequences. A driver focused on finding a street sign might fail to see a pedestrian stepping into the crosswalk. The pedestrian is in plain sight, but the driver's attention is fully occupied with scanning for the sign. This is one reason why distracted driving, such as talking on the phone or adjusting a GPS, is so dangerous. The eyes may be open and looking ahead, but the mind is elsewhere. In sports, athletes often experience inattentional blindness during competition. A basketball player may focus so hard on guarding their opponent that they fail to notice another player moving into a perfect position to score. Coaches design drills to train players to widen their focus and become aware of the entire court. Without this training, players can miss key moments that change the outcome of a game. Emergency situations highlight how strong this effect can be. In a hospital, a nurse may focus on starting an IV line and miss signs that a patient's condition is rapidly worsening. In firefighting, a responder might be so intent on putting out visible flames that they fail to see a collapsing structure nearby. These are not careless mistakes. They are the result of the brain's natural limits under stress and heavy focus. The military and law enforcement have also studied inattentional blindness. Soldiers in combat must track many threats at once. If they focus on one danger, they might miss another approaching from the side. Training programs teach strategies to scan the environment and check blind spots. Police officers in high-pressure encounters face similar challenges. They may focus on a weapon in a suspect's hand and miss other important details, like the presence of bystanders. Technology can both help and worsen this problem. Navigation systems, alerts, and reminders can guide attention to critical details. At the same time, constant notifications and screens compete for focus. A person checking their phone while walking through a busy street may not notice a car turning the corner. The phone becomes the primary task, leaving the surroundings unnoticed. Consider a simple scene at home. You are cooking dinner while watching a video on your tablet. Your child comes into the kitchen and asks a question, but you are so focused on following the recipe that you do not hear them. The child repeats the question louder, and you suddenly realize they have been talking to you for a while. In that moment, you are not deaf or ignoring them on purpose. Your attention was fully locked on cooking, creating a temporary blindness to everything else. Inattentional blindness also affects memory. You cannot remember what you never noticed in the first place. If you fail to see an event because your focus was elsewhere, your memory will have a blank space. This can lead to confusion later. For example, in a workplace meeting, you might be writing notes about one topic while someone introduces a new idea. Because you were focused on note-taking, you may later insist that the new idea was never mentioned, even though everyone else remembers it clearly. Magicians take advantage of inattentional blindness to perform tricks. They direct the audience's attention to one hand or one object while secretly making changes elsewhere. Because the audience is focused where the magician wants, they fail to see what really happens. Pickpockets use similar tactics. They create a distraction, like bumping into someone, while their other hand takes a wallet. The victim's attention is pulled to the distraction, leaving them unaware of the theft until it is too late. Research shows that inattentional blindness can occur even with unusual or striking events. The gorilla experiment proves that something obvious and strange can still go unseen. This is why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable. A person may be completely certain about what they saw during a crime or accident, but their attention might have been so narrow that they missed key details. Courts and investigators must consider this limitation when evaluating witness statements. Being aware of this effect can help reduce its impact. The first step is to accept that no one sees everything. Even when you feel alert, your attention is limited. You can practice habits that widen your focus. For instance, drivers can make a point to scan their surroundings regularly rather than fixate on one area of the road. At work, you can pause between tasks to check if you missed anything happening around you. In high-stakes jobs, teams use structured systems to fight inattentional blindness. Pilots run through checklists to make sure nothing is overlooked. In hospitals, surgical teams perform verbal confirmations of key steps before moving on. These practices force attention to shift and cover areas that might otherwise be ignored. Everyday actions can also help. If you are walking in a crowded place while using your phone, you can stop walking while you check your screen. This prevents your attention from being split between two competing tasks. If you are in a meeting, you can close other programs on your computer so your focus stays on the discussion. Small changes like these can lower the risk of missing important details. Inattentional blindness shows that seeing is not the same as perceiving. The eyes may look directly at something, but if attention is elsewhere, the brain does not register it. This gap between sight and awareness affects everyone, no matter how careful or experienced they are. By understanding how focus works, you can make choices to improve how you notice the world around you and avoid the mistakes that come from missing what is right in front of you. The Müller-Lyer illusion is a classic example of how the brain can misinterpret what the eyes see. It involves two straight lines of equal length. At the ends of one line, the arrows point inward like the tips of a spear. At the ends of the other line, the arrows point outward like the tail of a bird. Even though the lines are the same length, most people see the line with the inward arrows as shorter and the line with the outward arrows as longer. This simple image shows how context changes perception. The brain does not only see the line itself, but also interprets it in relation to the shapes around it. This illusion has been studied for more than a century. Franz Karl Müller-Lyer, a German psychologist, first described it in 1889. He wanted to show how the mind adds meaning to visual information. The eyes send raw data to the brain, but the brain then processes that data by comparing it to past experiences and expectations. In this case, the direction of the arrows provides a context that influences how the brain judges length. To understand why this happens, consider how people see depth in everyday life. In a three-dimensional world, lines that angle inward often signal that something is far away, like the corners of a room or the edges of a hallway. Lines that angle outward often signal that something is close, like the edge of a table or a doorway. The brain uses these cues to understand distance and size. When looking at the illusion, the brain interprets the inward arrows as part of a distant corner and the outward arrows as part of a nearby edge. This causes the line with outward arrows to seem longer, even though on the page, both lines are flat and identical. Imagine standing in a long hallway. The lines of the walls, ceiling, and floor all angle toward a point in the distance. Your brain uses these converging lines to judge depth. If someone stands at the far end of the hallway, they appear smaller even though their actual size has not changed. The Müller-Lyer illusion works in a similar way. The inward arrows mimic the angles found in faraway corners, while the outward arrows mimic the angles of close objects. The brain applies its rules for interpreting depth, which creates the false impression of different lengths. This effect is so strong that even when people know about the illusion, they still see the lines as unequal. You can measure the lines with a ruler, and they will match perfectly, but your brain continues to misread them. This shows that perception is automatic. It happens before conscious thought. You cannot simply decide to see the lines correctly because the brain processes the image in a way that feels natural and immediate. The illusion also reveals differences between cultures. Researchers have found that people who grow up in environments filled with straight lines, corners, and rectangular shapes, such as cities with modern buildings, are more strongly affected by the Müller-Lyer illusion. People from rural areas or places with round huts and fewer straight lines are less affected. This suggests that visual perception is shaped by experience. The brain learns to interpret certain patterns based on the environment. In a world full of sharp angles and corners, the inward and outward arrows trigger strong depth cues. In a world without those shapes, the brain may not apply the same rules, so the illusion is weaker. This cultural difference can be seen through a scenario. Imagine a child growing up in a city apartment. Every day, they see square windows, rectangular doors, and straight hallways. Their brain becomes skilled at reading these shapes as signals of distance and size. When that child looks at the Müller-Lyer illusion, their brain applies the same interpretation. It treats the inward arrows like a far corner and the outward arrows like a near edge, making the lines seem different in length. Now imagine a child growing up in a round house with curved walls and few sharp angles. Their brain has less reason to link those arrow shapes to depth. When they see the illusion, the effect is much weaker because their brain does not make the same connection. The Müller-Lyer illusion appears in everyday situations. Interior designers use it without realizing. A room with angled furniture or slanted walls can seem larger or smaller depending on how the lines guide perception. In architecture, certain design choices can make hallways appear longer or ceilings seem higher. Advertisers also use similar tricks in packaging. A box with specific shapes and patterns may appear bigger or smaller than it really is, influencing how consumers view the product. This illusion demonstrates that seeing is not a simple process. The eyes capture light and send signals to the brain, but the brain must then interpret those signals. It uses context, past experiences, and built-in rules to make sense of what it sees. Most of the time, these interpretations are accurate and helpful. They allow people to move through the world safely and efficiently. However, in certain situations, the same rules create mistakes, like the Müller-Lyer illusion. Consider how this plays out when reading maps or blueprints. Someone looking at a map might misjudge distances if certain lines or shapes resemble those in the illusion. A hallway on a blueprint might seem longer than it really is because of the way its lines are drawn. This can lead to design errors or misunderstandings during construction. Professionals in these fields learn to account for such effects by using precise measurements instead of relying on visual judgment alone. The illusion also affects decision-making in subtle ways. Imagine you are comparing two products on a shelf. The packaging of one has outward angles that make it seem larger, while the other has inward angles that make it seem smaller. Even if both contain the same amount, you might choose the one that appears bigger. Companies often design their packaging to take advantage of these visual biases, knowing that customers will trust their eyes more than the printed numbers. Artists use similar principles in their work. A painter might use converging lines to create depth on a flat canvas. By manipulating angles and shapes, they can make a scene appear three-dimensional. This skill relies on the same brain processes that cause the Müller-Lyer illusion. The difference is that in art, the distortion is intentional and understood, while in the illusion, it happens without awareness. The Müller-Lyer illusion also plays a role in how people judge speed and distance. Drivers on a road with converging lines, like a narrow tunnel, may misjudge how fast they are going. The angles of the tunnel walls can create a false sense of movement. Pilots experience similar effects when landing on runways that appear wider or narrower than expected. In both cases, training and instruments help correct these errors, but the initial perception is still shaped by the same visual rules that drive the illusion. Understanding this illusion helps reveal the limits of human perception. People rely on their senses to make decisions, but those senses are not perfect. The brain constantly interprets and adjusts what the eyes see, and sometimes it gets it wrong. The Müller-Lyer illusion is a simple drawing, yet it exposes how complex and fragile the process of seeing really is. By studying it, researchers gain insight into how the mind works and why people sometimes see the world in ways that do not match reality. Color constancy is the brain's way of keeping color stable even when the lighting changes. This ability helps you recognize objects in different settings. A red apple looks red whether you see it under bright sunlight, indoor lamps, or in the shade. The light hitting the apple changes in each situation, but your brain adjusts the color so you continue to see it as the same red. Without color constancy, the world would appear to shift constantly, and objects would look like they were changing color every time the light source changed. This stability helps you move through the world without confusion. To understand how this works, think about walking through a house during the day. Sunlight comes in through the windows and creates one type of light. Later, as night falls, you turn on indoor lights, which create a different type of light with a yellow or orange tone. Even though the lighting has changed, the walls still look like they are painted the same color. This happens because your brain adjusts the signals from your eyes to keep the color consistent. The brain uses information from the surrounding scene, like shadows and reflections, to figure out what the actual color of an object is supposed to be. This process is useful most of the time, but it can sometimes cause mistakes. A well-known example is the viral photo of a dress that appeared on the internet in 2015. Some people saw the dress as white and gold, while others saw it as blue and black. The photo did not change, yet people strongly disagreed about what they were looking at. This debate spread quickly because it revealed how differently the brain can interpret the same image. The reason for the disagreement came down to how each person's brain interpreted the lighting in the photo. The picture had no clear clues about whether the dress was in shadow or under bright light. Some brains assumed it was in shadow and adjusted the colors as if the lighting was dim. These people saw the dress as white and gold. Others assumed the dress was brightly lit and adjusted the colors in the opposite way. They saw it as blue and black. Both groups were using normal color constancy processes, but because the context was unclear, their brains reached different answers. This shows how powerful color constancy is and how much it depends on surrounding information. In most real-world situations, the brain has plenty of context. When you see a red apple on a tree, the leaves, branches, and sky give your brain clues about the lighting. If the apple is in shadow, your brain knows to adjust for the darker light. If the apple is in direct sun, it adjusts for the brightness. In a flat photograph like the dress image, many of these clues are missing, so the brain has to guess. That guess can differ from person to person. Consider another example. You're at a restaurant with dim lighting. A white plate still looks white, even though the light shining on it is dark yellow. Your brain compares the plate to other objects in the room, like the tablecloth or the color of food, and figures out that the plate itself has not changed. This helps you eat without confusion because you can still tell which foods are which, even in unusual lighting. Without this adjustment, a steak might look green or blue under certain lamps, making it harder to recognize. Artists and photographers have long understood how light affects color perception. A painter working in a studio knows that the same paint color can look different depending on whether it is viewed under natural daylight or artificial light. Photographers deal with this problem through white balance settings on cameras. These settings mimic what the brain does automatically. They correct for the color of the light so that the colors in the photo match what people expect to see. If the white balance is set incorrectly, the entire image can take on a strange tint, such as looking too blue or too orange. Color constancy also plays a role in safety. Traffic lights are designed with clear red, yellow, and green signals, so drivers can identify them at a glance, no matter what time of day it is or what kind of weather is present. If the brain did not maintain color stability, a red light might look completely different at dawn than it does at noon, which could lead to accidents. Manufacturers test these colors under many lighting conditions to make sure they remain recognizable. The effect can be seen in retail stores as well. Clothing often looks different under store lights than it does outside. Store lighting may have a slightly warm or cool tint that changes how colors appear. A shirt that looks one shade in the fitting room may look completely different in sunlight. Your brain works to correct the color in both situations. But because the surrounding cues are different, the final perception may shift. This is why people sometimes return clothes after realizing they do not match what they expected. An everyday scenario shows how much the brain depends on context. Imagine you are sitting in a park at sunset. The light is soft and orange, but the white pages of your book still look white. This happens because your brain takes in the whole scene, the color of the grass, the shadows of trees, and the fading sky, and uses that information to keep the page color stable. If someone were to take a photograph of the same scene, the camera might capture the page as orange because it lacks the brain's ability to adjust in real time. Research on color constancy helps explain why people sometimes argue about color descriptions. Two people might look at the same car and describe its color differently, especially under mixed lighting conditions like cloudy skies or street lamps. Each person's brain is making slightly different corrections based on what they expect the light to be. This does not mean either person is wrong. It means their brains are solving the problem in different ways. Designers and engineers use this knowledge when creating visual displays. For example, in hospitals, monitors must show accurate colors so that staff can read vital signs correctly. If the display colors shifted under different room lighting, it could cause confusion and errors. Similarly, airplane cockpits are designed so that warning lights remain consistent and clear, no matter what lighting conditions exist outside the plane. Color constancy also affects how people interpret images on screens. When you watch a movie on your phone or television, the lighting in the room influences what you see. If you are in a dark room, the colors may appear more vivid. In bright sunlight, the same colors may seem washed out. Your brain works to correct for this, but it can only do so much without full context. This is why professional video editors use controlled lighting to ensure that what they see matches what viewers will see later. A simple way to test color constancy is to place a piece of colored paper under different light sources. Under a desk lamp, sunlight, and a fluorescent bulb, the paper will look slightly different, but you will still recognize its true color. Your brain uses the surrounding environment to keep the color stable, even as the light changes. If you take a photo of the paper in each setting, the differences will be much more obvious because the camera lacks the brain's automatic adjustment. The viral dress to date became so popular because it made this hidden process visible. Most of the time, people do not think about how their brains correct colors. They assume everyone sees the same thing they do. When the photo spread online, it revealed just how much variation there can be in perception. Two people could look at the exact same image and see completely different colors, each certain they were correct. This simple photo opened a window into how complex and subjective color perception can be, showing that what we see is shaped by both the eyes and the brain. Auditory illusions occur when the brain misinterprets sound. They work like visual illusions, but involve hearing instead of sight. The ears receive sound waves and send them to the brain, where they are processed and understood. Most of the time, this process works well. You can identify voices, music, and everyday noises without difficulty. However, when the sound is unclear or contains conflicting information, the brain must make a decision about what it is hearing. In these moments, perception can be shaped by expectations, context, and even physical differences in hearing, leading to very different experiences for different listeners. A well-known example is the Laurel versus Yanny recording that went viral in 2018. People were asked to listen to a short audio clip and report what word they heard. Some listeners clearly heard the word Laurel, while others were equally certain they heard the word Yanny. The debate spread across social media as friends and families argued about which word was correct. The interesting part is that the sound file never changed. The difference came from how each person's brain processed the same set of frequencies. The clip contained a mixture of low and high frequencies. The word Laurel was more dominant in the lower frequencies, while the word Yanny appeared more in the higher ones. If a listener's hearing was more sensitive to lower frequencies, they tended to hear Laurel. If they were more sensitive to higher frequencies, they tended to hear Yanny. Age plays a role in this difference. As people grow older, they often lose the ability to hear higher frequencies. This means that younger people were slightly more likely to hear Yanny, while older listeners were more likely to hear Laurel. Context also influenced the perception. If someone told you in advance that the clip said Laurel, your brain was more likely to lock on to that interpretation. The same happened with Yanny. This shows how powerful expectations can be. The brain tries to make sense of ambiguous information by using hints from the environment or from what you have been told. Even a suggestion can shift what you think you hear. A similar phenomenon happens in everyday life. Imagine you are at a crowded party. Many conversations are happening around you, creating a jumble of noise. Suddenly, you hear your name spoken by someone across the room. Your brain pulls that sound out of the background because it is meaningful to you. This is sometimes called the cocktail party effect. The reverse can also happen. If you expect to hear a certain phrase, you might hear it, even when the actual sound is different. This is why misheard song lyrics are common. The brain fills in what it thinks should be there, not necessarily what is really being sung. There are other well-known auditory illusions that demonstrate how perception works. The shepherd tone is one example. It sounds like a never-ending rising pitch, even though the actual sound is looping. This effect is created by layering multiple tones that fade in and out at different times. As the higher tones fade away, new lower tones start quietly in the background. The brain hears the overall pattern as a continuous rise, even though it is impossible for a pitch to rise forever. This illusion has been used in movies and video games to create tension or a feeling of endless movement. Another common illusion is the McGurk effect. This occurs when what you see affects what you hear. In experiments, a video shows a person's mouth forming one syllable, like ga, while the audio plays a different syllable, like ba. Most people report hearing a third sound, such as da, even though that sound is not present. The brain combines the conflicting visual and auditory information and produces a new perception. This shows how hearing is closely linked to sight. In real-world conversations, you often rely on lip reading without realizing it. These illusions reveal that hearing is not a simple process of the ears sending signals to the brain. The brain actively interprets sound using both the physical signal and the context around it. In a noisy environment, you might hear words that are not actually spoken because your brain is trying to fill in gaps. In quiet environments, you might still mishear something if you expect a different word or phrase. Consider a scenario at work. Two coworkers are talking in a hallway while printers hum and phones ring. One says, "I need to order files," but the other hears, "I need to order fries." The sounds are similar, and the background noise makes them harder to separate. The listener's brain chooses the most likely interpretation based on what they expect to hear. If they were hungry or thinking about lunch, fries might seem more plausible than files. This simple misunderstanding shows how easily auditory illusions can happen in daily life. Music also provides many examples of these effects. Some songs include hidden messages or reversed lyrics that listeners claim to hear. These messages are often not actually present in the sound. Instead, the brain imposes them once the listener knows what to expect. When someone tells you to listen for a specific phrase, you are more likely to hear it because your brain is primed to detect that pattern. Without the suggestion, the same sound might seem meaningless or random. In safety-critical jobs, auditory illusions can cause serious problems. Air traffic controllers, pilots, and emergency responders all rely on clear communication. If a message is misheard, the consequences can be severe. To prevent this, these professions use specific words and codes designed to reduce confusion. For instance, pilots use the phonetic alphabet, saying alpha instead of A, and bravo instead of B. This helps distinguish similar sounds, even in noisy or stressful situations. Technology has also created new situations where auditory illusions matter. Voice assistants like those on smartphones must interpret speech accurately. If the software mistakes one word for another, the device may perform the wrong action. Designers train these systems using many voices and background noises to reduce errors. However, even advanced technology faces the same challenges as the human brain. Sound is often messy and ambiguous. Auditory illusions can even be playful. Musicians and sound engineers sometimes use them to create special effects. A song might include a shepherd tone to make a section feel as if it is building endlessly. Movie soundtracks use similar tricks to create suspense or surprise. Magicians combine visual distractions with hidden sounds to make their performances more convincing. By understanding how the brain processes sound, performers can guide the audience's perception in creative ways. An everyday test of auditory illusions is listening to a song on cheap speakers versus high-quality headphones. On poor equipment, certain frequencies may be lost, and the song might sound flat or muffled. Your brain fills in some of the missing details based on memory and expectation. When you switch to better headphones, you suddenly hear parts of the song you did not notice before, like subtle instruments or background vocals. This shift highlights how the quality of sound changes what you perceive. The Laurel versus Yanny debate became popular because it exposed the hidden complexity of hearing. People were surprised to learn that two listeners could hear completely different words from the same clip. It showed that perception is not only about sound waves entering the ears. It involves the brain making choices based on frequency sensitivity, past experience, and even suggestion. This realization can be both fascinating and humbling. It reminds us that what we hear is not always an exact reflection of reality. Auditory illusions demonstrate that sound is not simply received. It is interpreted, shaped, and sometimes transformed by the brain. Whether it is a viral debate, a misheard lyric, or a never-ending tone, these illusions reveal how active and complex the process of hearing truly is. They show that even when two people listen to the same sound, their experiences may be completely different, shaped by factors they may not even be aware of. Time perception distortion happens when your experience of time does not match the clock. The actual passage of time stays the same, but the way it feels can speed up or slow down depending on your emotions, focus, and surroundings. This effect is part of how the brain processes events. Time is not something the brain measures directly. Instead, it builds a sense of time from changes, memories, and signals from the body and environment. Because of this, time can feel flexible even though it is constant. Fear is one of the strongest factors that can make time seem slower. When you are in danger, the brain shifts into a high alert state. Your senses become sharper and your attention narrows to focus on survival. In these moments, your brain gathers and stores far more information than usual. Later, when you recall the event, it feels as if it lasted longer than it really did. Imagine you are driving and a deer jumps in front of your car. In the split second before you hit the brakes, you might feel like everything slows down. You notice the position of the deer, the texture of the road, and even small sounds like your heartbeat. The actual time might be only a second or two, but your memory of it contains so many details that it feels stretched out. Amusement parks provide a less intense example. On a roller coaster, the drop might last only a few seconds, but the fear and excitement make it feel much longer. Your brain reacts to the surge of emotion by expanding your sense of time. This effect helps you respond quickly to threats. but it also creates the strange sensation that a short moment lasted far beyond its real duration. Joy and deep focus can have the opposite effect. When you are fully absorbed in an activity, you stop noticing the passage of time. This is sometimes called being in the zone or in a flow state. Athletes often experience this during competition, musicians during a performance, or writers while working on a story. Hours can pass, but it feels like only minutes. Because your attention is locked on the task, you are not tracking time in the usual way. With fewer mental markers, the brain has little information to measure how much time has passed, so it feels compressed. Consider a simple situation like spending time with friends. You sit down for coffee and conversation. The discussion is lively and you are fully engaged. When you finally check the clock, you are surprised to see that 3 hours have gone by. Your memory of the event is smooth and continuous, so it feels like it happened quickly. In contrast, waiting alone in a doctor's office can make 5 minutes feel like half an hour. In that situation, you are aware of every small detail: the ticking clock, the sound of footsteps, the uncomfortable chair. Each of these details becomes a marker in your mind, and the more markers there are, the longer the moment feels. Stress and boredom play important roles in this process. When you are bored, you are not deeply engaged in what you are doing, so your attention shifts inward. You notice every second passing, which makes time drag. In stressful situations, your body releases adrenaline, heightening your senses. This extra awareness increases the number of memories formed in a short period, stretching your sense of time even further. Cultural factors can also influence time perception. In fast-paced environments like busy cities, people often feel time moving quickly because they are constantly shifting focus from one task to another. In slower-paced settings, such as rural areas, the same amount of time might feel more expansive because there are fewer rapid changes competing for attention. Technology can amplify these effects. Scrolling through social media or playing video games can create a state of deep focus. You look up from your phone and realize an hour has passed without you noticing. The constant flow of new information keeps your brain engaged, reducing your awareness of time. In contrast, waiting for a slow internet connection or a download bar to finish can make a few seconds feel painfully long. When you focus on progress, each moment stretches because you are counting it closely. Time perception also changes with age. Children often feel like days and weeks last longer. Their brains are processing many new experiences, creating more mental markers. As people age and routines become familiar, there are fewer unique events to track, so time feels like it moves faster. A child's summer vacation might seem endless, while an adult's summer feels like it ends in a blink. This difference is not because time actually moves faster, but because the brain is recording different amounts of information. A practical example of this can be seen in travel. When you visit a new city for the first time, the trip feels long and full. Every street, meal, and activity is new, creating many memories. On a return visit, the same amount of time might feel much shorter because your brain recognizes more of the environment and processes it with less effort. Novelty stretches time, while familiarity compresses it. Sports events highlight how emotions distort time. In the final seconds of a close game, fans and players often feel like the clock is moving in slow motion. Each play and decision feels magnified. When your team is winning, the last moments seem to crawl by. When your team is losing, the time can feel like it runs out too quickly. Both experiences show how emotional investment changes perception. Medical research has explored how certain conditions affect time perception. People with anxiety disorders often report that time feels slower during periods of intense worry. Their heightened state of alertness makes them notice every detail, similar to how fear slows time in dangerous situations. On the other hand, people experiencing depression may feel that time drags endlessly because of reduced engagement with their surroundings. Understanding these distortions can help in diagnosing and treating mental health conditions. Virtual reality technology offers insight into how easily time can be manipulated. In a virtual environment, designers can control how many events happen in a given period. A fast-paced game with constant action can make 30 minutes feel like 5. A slow, meditative experience can make 10 minutes feel like half an hour. By adjusting the pace of events, virtual reality taps into the same mechanisms that affect time perception in real life. Air travel creates another interesting scenario. On a long flight, you might watch movies, read, or sleep. When you are entertained or asleep, the hours seem to pass quickly. During periods of restlessness, when you are counting down the minutes to arrival, time feels painfully slow. The actual flight duration does not change, but your experience of it shifts depending on how engaged you are. Time perception distortion has practical consequences. In workplaces, deadlines can feel closer or farther away depending on stress levels. A relaxed project timeline might feel comfortable until the final week, when pressure suddenly makes each day seem shorter. In hospitals, doctors and nurses often report losing track of time during emergencies because their attention is fully absorbed in patient care. A classic personal example is studying for an exam. When you start early and work steadily, time feels manageable. If you wait until the night before, stress floods in and hours seem to vanish. You may look at the clock and feel shocked that so much time has passed. The difference lies not in the clock, but in how focus and emotion shape your perception. These shifts show that time is not experienced equally. Fear stretches moments. Joy and flow compress them. Boredom slows them down. Engagement speeds them up. The brain constantly interprets events, creating a personal timeline that can differ greatly from the one measured by a clock. This is why two people can share the same afternoon, yet describe it in completely different ways, each shaped by their feelings and focus throughout the day. Confirmation bias happens when people focus on information that supports what they already believe, while ignoring or dismissing information that challenges those beliefs. It is a natural part of how the brain processes information. The mind likes patterns and consistency. When something fits what you expect, it feels comfortable and easy to accept. When something does not fit, it creates tension. To avoid that tension, the brain often pushes aside the uncomfortable fact or finds reasons to question it. This happens automatically, without people realizing it, and it shapes how they see the world and make decisions. Imagine you believe a certain sports team is the best. When you read articles praising the team, you nod along and feel more confident in your belief. When you read criticism, you might think the writer is biased or misinformed, even if the criticism is based on solid evidence. You are more likely to reject it because it conflicts with what you already believe. Over time, this creates a loop where you gather more and more support for your view while blocking out anything that might change your mind. This same process plays out in many areas of life, such as politics, health, and relationships. A common example is how people read the news. If someone already holds a political opinion, they often prefer news sources that match their views. When they encounter an article that challenges their perspective, they may stop reading or criticize the source instead of considering the content. This creates echo chambers, where only similar ideas are shared, making beliefs stronger and harder to question. Confirmation bias is powerful because it affects how we search for, interpret, and remember information. When searching for information, people naturally use keywords or questions that favor their existing ideas. For example, if someone believes a certain diet is effective, they might search online for benefits of this diet rather than problems with this diet. This one small choice shapes the results they see, which in turn strengthens their belief. Interpretation is another stage where bias shows up. Suppose two friends watch the same video of a referee making a call in a sports game. One friend supports Team A, while the other supports Team B. Even though they both see the exact same footage, the friend who supports Team A might say that was a fair call, while the friend who supports Team B might say the referee is cheating. Their brains interpret the same event differently because of their pre-existing loyalties. Memory is also affected. People tend to remember facts that fit their beliefs and forget those that do not. Imagine a manager who believes one employee is lazy. If that employee shows up late, the manager remembers it clearly and sees it as proof of laziness. If the same employee stays late to finish a project, the manager might forget about it or see it as an exception. Over time, the remembered events build a story that supports the manager's initial judgment, even if it is unfair. This bias can be seen in medical decisions as well. A person who believes a certain remedy works might only recall the times they felt better after using it. They may ignore the times it did nothing or even made things worse. When talking with others, they share only the positive outcomes, which reinforces the belief for everyone involved. This selective recall can spread misinformation and prevent people from seeking more effective treatments. Confirmation bias is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides under the surface, shaping decisions in small ways. Consider a hiring manager reviewing resumes. If the manager believes graduates from a certain school make the best employees, they might pay extra attention to applicants from that school. They might overlook flaws in those resumes while being overly critical of resumes from other schools. The decision feels fair to the manager, but it is influenced by a hidden bias. In relationships, this bias can cause misunderstandings. If someone believes their partner does not listen to them, they notice every time the partner seems distracted. They might ignore or forget the many times the partner paid close attention. This creates a distorted picture of the relationship. Over time, the belief becomes stronger, not because it is entirely true, but because the person only sees evidence that supports it. The way people ask questions also reflects confirmation bias. During a meeting, a leader might ask, "Why is this project successful?" instead of, "What challenges might this project face?" The first question assumes success and guides the discussion toward positive evidence. The second question opens the door to different perspectives. Simply changing the wording of a question can reveal how bias shapes thought and communication. Social media platforms often amplify confirmation bias. Algorithms are designed to show content that users are likely to engage with. If someone likes posts that match their beliefs, the platform responds by showing them more of the same. This creates a cycle where a person sees only one side of an issue. Over time, they may become more certain their view is correct because they rarely encounter alternative ideas. An example of this can be seen in debates over health topics. If a person believes a certain food is harmful, they might join groups or follow pages that share warnings about that food. Each post reinforces their belief, while opposing information never appears in their feed. Even if scientific studies show a different conclusion, the person may never see them, or if they do, they may dismiss them as untrustworthy. Businesses can also be affected. A company developing a new product might focus only on positive feedback from early tests. If negative feedback comes in, the team might explain it away as a fluke. This selective attention can lead to poor decisions, such as launching a product that customers do not actually want. By ignoring contradictory evidence, the company misses the chance to make improvements before release. One way to see confirmation bias clearly is through a simple scenario. Imagine two investors evaluating a startup. The first investor believes the company will succeed, while the second is doubtful. When they attend a presentation, the optimistic investor notices every sign of progress, the strong leadership, the enthusiastic customers, the growing sales. The doubtful investor focuses on the risks, the competition, the lack of resources, the gaps in the plan. Both investors see the same presentation, but each walks away with a different conclusion because they filtered the information through their beliefs. Confirmation bias can even affect science, which is built on testing and questioning ideas. Researchers are human, and they may prefer results that confirm their theories. This is why peer review and replication are important. When other scientists repeat experiments, they can catch errors or overlooked data. These checks help reduce the impact of individual bias and keep research more objective. Understanding confirmation bias is useful because it explains why people can look at the same situation and reach opposite conclusions. It shows why debates often feel frustrating. Each side is certain they have the facts, yet both are filtering information in ways that support their own views. Recognizing this tendency can help people slow down and consider other perspectives. A practical example is reading news from different sources. If you normally read one type of publication, try reading another with a different viewpoint. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, but it can reveal blind spots. Asking yourself, what evidence would change my mind, is another way to challenge bias. This question forces you to think about what information would be convincing, rather than just defending your current belief. Confirmation bias is part of being human. It protects the mind from constant doubt and confusion, but it also creates a risk of distorted thinking. By paying attention to how it works, you can take small steps to see a fuller picture and make choices based on a wider range of evidence. The anchoring effect happens when the first piece of information you receive about something strongly influences how you think about it afterward. This initial information acts like a mental anchor. Once it is in place, all later judgments and decisions tend to revolve around it, even if the first piece of information is unrelated or wrong. The effect works quietly, without you realizing it, and it can shape choices in ways that feel rational but are not. Imagine you are shopping for a car. The first car you see is priced at $35,000. Even if you know nothing about cars, that number sticks in your mind. When you see another car for $28,000, it feels like a good deal because it is lower than the first price. The second car might still be too expensive or even overpriced, but the original number has set a standard. Your brain compares every other option to that starting point, rather than making an independent judgment. This same effect shows up in negotiations. Suppose a person selling a house asks for $400,000. Even if the buyer planned to offer much less, the high asking price sets the tone for the discussion. The buyer's counteroffer may be higher than they intended, simply because the first number created a frame of reference. This is why experienced negotiators try to be the first to state a number. Whoever speaks first often controls the range of possible outcomes, even if the starting number has little to do with the actual value. Anchoring can influence decisions far beyond shopping or bargaining. In experiments, researchers have shown people random numbers, such as by spinning a wheel with digits on it. After seeing the number, participants are asked unrelated questions, like estimating the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Those who saw a higher number on the wheel gave higher estimates than those who saw a lower number, even though the number had no connection to the question. This shows how powerful anchoring is. The brain uses whatever information is available, even if it is meaningless. Consider a scenario at work. A project manager asks a team how long a task will take. The first person says, maybe 3 weeks. Even if no one has analyzed the work in detail, 3 weeks becomes the reference point. Others might adjust slightly up or down, but most of the discussion stays close to that original figure. If the first person had said 6 weeks, the entire conversation would likely center around that instead. The actual amount of work has not changed, only the starting number. But the estimates shift dramatically because of the anchor. Anchoring also appears in courtrooms. When prosecutors recommend a sentence for a crime, that number can affect how judges or juries view the case. Even if the recommendation is extreme, it creates a starting point that shapes later decisions. Studies have found that judges give higher sentences when the initial number suggested is high, even when they know the recommendation may be biased. This shows that even experts are not immune to the effect. Retailers take advantage of anchoring to influence customers. A store might display an item with a regular price of $100 and a sale price of $60. Even if the item's true value is much lower, the original higher price makes the sale price seem like a bargain. The customer focuses on the difference between the two numbers rather than questioning whether $60 is fair. This strategy works because the brain automatically uses the first number as a reference. The anchoring effect can also shape how people judge quality. Imagine you are at a restaurant and see a wine list. The first bottle on the list costs $200. The second bottle costs $70. The $70 bottle now seems reasonable, even though it might still be expensive. If the list had started with a $30 bottle, the $70 bottle would seem costly. The actual wine has not changed, only the starting point that frames your perception. In everyday conversations, anchoring happens through language. If someone describes a coworker as difficult before you meet them, that word becomes your first piece of information. When you finally meet the coworker, you are more likely to notice behaviors that fit the description and overlook behaviors that do not. Your judgment has been shaped by the initial description, even if it was incomplete or inaccurate. Anchoring affects self-perception as well. Suppose you receive feedback at work, and the first comment is negative. Even if later comments are positive, the negative feedback can stick and shape how you interpret the rest. The same works in reverse. If the first comment is positive, you may see later neutral or negative feedback as less important. The order of information matters, because the first point creates a lasting frame for everything that follows. This effect shows up in health decisions too. Imagine a doctor tells a patient there is a 50% chance of success for a treatment. The patient will see that number as a starting point. If another doctor later says the chance is closer to 30%, the patient may view it as worse news than if they had only heard 30% from the start. The initial figure creates expectations that color how later information feels. Anchoring can even affect memories of events. When people recall how much pain they felt during an experience, the first number they hear about pain levels can influence their report. If someone says, "Most people rate this as a 7 out of 10, that number becomes the anchor. Even if the actual pain was less, the person might rate it higher because of the suggestion. Sports provide another clear example. During a draft, analysts often predict how good a player will be. If the first prediction says a player will be a superstar, later evaluations tend to stay closer to that view, even if new evidence shows the player is struggling. If the first prediction says the player will fail, later judgments are harder to shift in the opposite direction. The initial assessment anchors how everyone thinks about the player's performance. This bias can also affect financial decisions. Investors might buy a stock at a certain price. That first price becomes their reference point. If the stock drops, they may refuse to sell because they are anchored to the higher original value. They hold on, waiting for it to return to what they see as its true worth, even if market conditions have changed. In reality, the original price was just a number, but it shapes decisions long after it stops being relevant. The anchoring effect is so powerful because it operates automatically. The brain needs a starting point to make sense of new information. Once that starting point is set, it is hard to ignore. Even when you know the anchor might be wrong, it still influences judgment. A person might say, "I know the first price is inflated, but it still feels expensive to go higher." Awareness alone does not erase the effect. A simple way to see anchoring in action is through guessing games. Ask a group of people whether the population of a city is higher or lower than 5 million. Then ask them to guess the exact number. Most guesses will cluster around 5 million. If you had started with 20 million, the guesses would cluster around that instead. The anchor creates a frame, and people adjust from there rather than starting fresh. Because anchoring affects so many decisions, being aware of it is useful. When you notice a first piece of information, pause before letting it shape your view. Ask yourself whether the starting point is truly relevant or just a random number. By slowing down and questioning the anchor, you can make choices based on evidence instead of being unconsciously guided by the first thing you heard. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut the brain uses to make quick judgments about how likely something is to happen. It works by pulling examples from memory. If you can think of an event easily, you assume it is common or likely. If it is hard to recall, you assume it is rare or unlikely. This process is fast and often useful, but it can lead to distorted thinking because what comes to mind easily is not always a true reflection of reality. The brain does not carefully calculate statistics in everyday life. It simply grabs the most vivid or recent memory and uses that as evidence. Imagine you are deciding whether to travel by plane or car. You recently saw a news story about a plane crash with dramatic images and interviews. That memory is clear and emotional, so it comes to mind right away. You may feel that flying is dangerous because the crash is easy to picture. At the same time, you do not recall news about car accidents as easily, even though they happen far more often. As a result, you might choose to drive instead of fly, believing it is safer. In reality, flying is statistically much safer than driving, but the vivid memory of the crash makes it feel riskier. This happens because the mind favors information that is recent, dramatic, or emotional. The news and social media play a big role in this effect. Events like shark attacks, kidnappings, or lottery wins are rare, but they receive heavy coverage because they grab attention. When people see these stories repeatedly, they start to believe the events are more common than they are. After a few widely reported shark attacks, beachgoers might avoid swimming, even though the actual risk has not changed. The stories are memorable, so they distort perception. Consider a situation where a person hears about burglaries in their neighborhood. Even if only one house was broken into, the story spreads quickly through conversations and local news. The vividness of the story makes it stick in memory. The person might then overestimate the chance of their own house being targeted. They could react by installing expensive security systems or feeling unsafe in their own home. The actual risk might be very low, but the ease of recalling the story makes it seem high. The availability heuristic also affects health decisions. Suppose you hear about someone who had a rare reaction to a vaccine. The story is shocking and detailed, so it stays in your mind. When deciding whether to get the vaccine, you recall that story easily. This may lead you to overestimate the likelihood of having the same reaction, even though serious side effects are extremely rare. At the same time, you might not recall stories about people protected from illness because those outcomes are less dramatic and not as widely reported. This imbalance shapes your decision, making you focus on the unusual event rather than the broader data. Businesses and marketers sometimes take advantage of this bias. Advertisements use vivid images and emotional stories to make products seem more appealing. A commercial for insurance might show dramatic scenes of car accidents, house fires, or medical emergencies. These images stick in your mind, making you feel the risk is greater than it really is. As a result, you may buy insurance based on fear rather than a realistic assessment of probability. In the workplace, managers may rely on the availability heuristic without realizing it. Imagine a manager who recently dealt with an employee who quit suddenly. When planning future staffing, the manager might focus too much on preventing surprise resignations because that memory is clear and recent. They might overlook other important issues like long-term training or improving team performance. Their judgment is skewed because the dramatic event is easier to recall than slower, less noticeable trends. This bias also affects how people think about causes of death. Many individuals fear dying in a plane crash or from a violent crime, even though heart disease and accidents at home are far more common. Plane crashes and violent crimes are covered heavily in the media, so they are easier to imagine. Diseases like heart problems receive less dramatic coverage, so they do not come to mind as quickly. As a result, people often misjudge what is truly dangerous and may focus their safety efforts on rare threats while ignoring everyday risks. Consider a group of friends talking about retirement investments. One friend tells a detailed story about losing money in the stock market. The story is emotional and memorable, so everyone at the table remembers it clearly. Later, when deciding how to invest, the group might overestimate the likelihood of losing money in stocks and avoid them entirely. They might choose a less risky option, even if it offers lower returns, because the vivid story of loss outweighs statistics showing that long-term investments are usually safe. The availability heuristic can even shape how people view their own lives. If you spend time reading about successes on social media, you might believe everyone else is more successful or happier than you. Posts about promotions, vacations, and achievements are easy to recall, while struggles and failures are rarely shared. Your perception of what is normal becomes distorted because the most memorable examples are not representative of reality. In emergency planning, this bias can lead to misplaced resources. If a city recently experienced a flood, officials might focus heavily on flood prevention in the following years. While this is important, they might neglect other risks like fires, earthquakes, or heat waves. The flood is fresh in memory, so it feels like the greatest danger, even if other threats are more likely to occur. The bias also appears in personal arguments. During a disagreement, people tend to recall examples that support their side. If you are arguing about who does more chores at home, you easily remember the times you cleaned the kitchen or took out the trash. Your partner easily recalls the times they did those tasks. Both of you have vivid examples in your mind, which makes it hard to see the situation objectively. The way questions are asked can influence how strongly this bias works. How common do you think car accidents are in this city? You might recall a recent news story about a crash. Because the memory is easy to access, you estimate the rate as higher than it is. If the question were phrased differently, such as, "What percentage of drivers in this city have never been in an accident?" you might focus on different memories and give a lower estimate. The same information leads to different judgments depending on what comes to mind first. A simple way to see the availability heuristic is to think about lottery winners. The stories of people winning huge jackpots are widely shared. You can easily recall images of smiling winners holding oversized checks. Because these memories are vivid, you might overestimate the chance of winning. In reality, the odds are extremely low, but they feel higher because the examples are easy to picture. This bias does not only affect individuals, it can influence entire groups. After a high-profile crime, communities may demand policy changes or stricter laws. even if crime rates are actually falling. The vividness of the event drives public opinion more strongly than statistics. Leaders must be careful to base decisions on reliable data rather than the most memorable examples. Understanding the availability heuristic helps explain why people often fear the wrong things or make choices based on dramatic stories instead of facts. Memories are not evenly stored or retrieved. The brain gives extra weight to events that are emotional, recent, or striking. By recognizing this tendency, you can pause and ask whether the examples that come to mind truly reflect reality or are simply the most vivid ones. Taking that extra step can lead to better decisions and a more accurate view of the world. The framing effect happens when the way information is presented changes how you feel about it and what decision you make. The actual facts stay the same, but the words, structure, or focus shift your perception. This effect works because the brain does not process information in a neutral way. It reacts to the tone and context in which the information appears. People often believe they are making rational choices based only on facts, but framing can steer their thinking without them realizing it. A simple example is how doctors communicate risk. If a doctor tells a patient that a procedure has a 90% survival rate, the patient is likely to feel hopeful and confident about going through with it. If the same doctor says the procedure has a 10% mortality rate, the patient may feel worried and uncertain, even though both statements describe the same reality. The first statement frames the situation positively by focusing on survival, while the second frames it negatively by focusing on death. The numbers are identical, but the choice of words changes the emotional reaction. This effect shows up in many everyday decisions. Imagine you are at a grocery store looking at ground beef. One package says 90% lean, while another says 10% fat. Most people feel more comfortable buying the package labeled 90% lean, even though it contains the exact same amount of fat as the other one. The positive frame makes the product seem healthier. The negative frame makes it seem less appealing. The difference is not in the product itself, but in how the information is presented. Framing can influence how people view financial decisions. Suppose an investment advisor says, "This fund has a 70% chance of making a profit." A client might feel optimistic and choose to invest. If the advisor instead says, "This fund has a 30% chance of losing money," the same client might decide against it. The probabilities are identical, but the positive frame encourages risk-taking, while the negative frame encourages caution. This is why the wording of financial advice matters so much. The framing effect also plays a role in public policy and voting. Lawmakers and campaigners carefully choose how to describe proposals. A tax plan described as tax relief feels supportive and helpful, while one described as tax burden feels heavy and unfair. Both may involve the same changes to taxes, but the language affects how voters perceive them. People respond to the emotional tone of the message, often without noticing that their reaction is driven by wording rather than content. In workplaces, managers can shape employee motivation through framing. Imagine a manager explaining a new performance system. If they say, "Employees who meet their goals will earn a bonus," the focus is on gaining a reward. If they say, "Employees who fail to meet their goals will miss out on a bonus," the focus is on avoiding a loss. Even though both statements describe the same rule, the first frame tends to create excitement and motivation, while the second can create anxiety and fear. The difference in tone can affect how employees approach their work and how they feel about their jobs. Framing also affects negotiations. Suppose a car salesperson says, "I can give you a $2,000 discount on this vehicle." the buyer feels like they are getting a good deal. If the salesperson instead says, "If you don't act now, you'll miss out on a $2,000 discount," the buyer might feel pressured to make a quick decision to avoid losing something. The framing here plays on loss aversion, the idea that people dislike losses more than they enjoy equivalent gains. By framing the same discount as either a gain or a loss, the salesperson can influence the buyer's emotions and choices. Research shows that negative frames often have a stronger impact than positive ones. This happens because the brain reacts more intensely to potential losses than to potential gains. For example, in health messaging, telling people that not exercising increases their risk of disease can be more effective at changing behavior than telling them that exercising improves health. The negative frame creates a sense of urgency and threat, which grabs attention. However, overuse of negative framing can also cause stress or resistance, so it must be used carefully. Consider how this plays out in parenting. A parent might say to a child, "If you study, you will do well on the test," which frames studying as a path to success. Alternatively, they might say, "If you don't study, you will fail the test," which frames not studying as a path to failure. Both messages communicate the same idea, but the first encourages effort through positive motivation, while the second uses fear of failure. The child's response may differ depending on which frame is used. The framing effect is especially important in situations involving uncertainty. When people do not have complete information, they rely more heavily on the way choices are presented. Imagine a medical trial for a new treatment. If researchers report that the treatment saves 70 out of 100 patients, it sounds promising. If they instead report that 30 out of 100 patients die despite treatment, it sounds alarming. Both statements describe the exact same outcome, but the framing can influence how patients, doctors, and regulators feel about approving the treatment. Framing can also affect group decisions. In a team meeting, the way a problem is described can shape the discussion. If a manager says, "We have a 60% chance of meeting our goals this quarter," the team may feel motivated and focus on opportunities. If the manager says, "We have a 40% chance of missing our goals," the same team may focus on risks and obstacles. This shift in focus can change not only mood, but also the strategies the team develops. The effect even extends to personal finances. Imagine a credit card company describing fees. If the company says, "You will save 5% if you pay with cash," the frame is positive. If it says, "You will be charged 5% extra for using a card," the frame is negative. Many customers will react more strongly to the idea of an extra charge than to the idea of a discount, even though both describe the same difference in cost. This is why businesses carefully choose how to frame prices and discounts. Framing does not only influence individuals, it shapes public conversations as well. During debates about environmental issues, for example, one group might frame an initiative as protecting natural resources, while another frames it as restricting economic growth. Both frames describe the same policy, but highlight different values. The chosen frame can determine whether people support or oppose the policy, even before they look at the details. An everyday example shows how subtle framing can be. Imagine two friends planning dinner. One says, "We have a 70% chance of getting a table at that restaurant without a reservation." The other says, "There's a 30% chance we won't get a table." Both statements are mathematically identical, but the first feels optimistic and encourages them to try, while the second feels pessimistic and might lead them to choose a different place. Framing also affects memory and how events are recalled. If a news report describes a protest as peaceful, viewers may later remember it as calm and orderly. If the same protest is described as a riot, viewers may recall it as violent and chaotic. even if the actual footage was the same. The frame not only shapes the immediate reaction, but also influences how the event is remembered later. This effect shows how important language and presentation are in all forms of communication. People like to think they make decisions based purely on facts, but the framing effect reveals that facts are rarely experienced in isolation. The words chosen, the order of information, and the emotional tone all play a role in shaping judgment. By paying attention to framing, individuals can better understand how their choices are influenced and take steps to focus on the core facts rather than the way they are packaged. Negativity bias is the tendency for negative experiences, thoughts, and emotions to affect us more strongly than positive ones. The human brain gives greater weight to bad news, painful memories, and criticism than it does to compliments or pleasant experiences. This bias developed as a survival tool. In early human history, noticing danger quickly was more important than noticing things that were safe. A person who paid close attention to threats, like a predator or a poisonous plant, had a better chance of surviving than someone who ignored them. Over time, this tendency became built into how the brain works. Today, it still shapes how people think, feel, and behave, even though most daily threats are not life or death situations. You can see negativity bias in everyday interactions. Imagine a manager giving feedback to an employee. During the meeting, the manager shares several positive comments about the employee's work and then ends with one piece of criticism. When the employee leaves, they are likely to focus on the criticism and replay it in their mind, often for hours or even days. The positive feedback fades quickly, while the negative comment lingers. Even though the manager said more good things than bad, the employee walks away feeling discouraged. This happens because the brain treats negative information as more urgent and important. This bias affects relationships as well. In a marriage or close friendship, one argument can feel more powerful than many moments of kindness. If a couple has a small fight in the morning, that negative moment might shape the mood for the entire day. The kind words spoken later may not fully erase the sting of the fight. Researchers have found that in healthy relationships, positive interactions must outnumber negative ones by a wide margin to keep the relationship stable. A single insult or hurtful action can outweigh several acts of care or appreciation. Negativity bias also shapes how people remember events. Think about a childhood memory. Many people remember embarrassing or painful moments with vivid detail, like being teased at school or failing a test. Positive memories, like a fun birthday party or a compliment from a teacher, may feel less sharp or even fade away entirely. This difference is not because negative events happen more often, but because the brain stores them more deeply. The extra focus on negative memories makes them easier to recall later, which can influence decisions and beliefs. Consider a work presentation. If you give a talk to a group and most people respond positively, you may still dwell on the one person who frowned or asked a tough question. Even though the majority of the feedback was good, your mind keeps circling back to the single negative reaction. This can make you feel like the entire presentation went poorly, even when it didn't. The imbalance between how you process positive and negative input can lead to distorted self-perception and unnecessary stress. News and media amplify this effect. Negative stories grab attention faster than positive ones. A report about a natural disaster, violent crime, or scandal spreads quickly because people are wired to pay attention to danger. Media outlets understand this and often focus on dramatic or upsetting stories. This creates a cycle where viewers are exposed to more negative content, which reinforces their belief that the world is unsafe or chaotic. even if the actual rate of crime or disasters is stable or declining. The constant stream of negative news makes it feel like things are getting worse. Negativity bias also plays a role in workplace culture. If employees hear one rumor about layoffs, it can overshadow months of positive announcements about growth or stability. Fear spreads quickly, and people may start making decisions based on worst-case scenarios. Managers have to work harder to communicate positive developments because they do not carry the same emotional weight as negative ones. A single piece of bad news can undo weeks of effort to build trust and morale. The bias is visible in education too. A student who receives mostly good grades might fixate on the one poor grade. Even if it represents a small part of their performance, it can dominate their thoughts and lower their confidence. Teachers often find that students remember critical comments much more clearly than encouraging ones. This can affect motivation and how students approach learning. Evolutionary psychology explains why negativity bias exists. In the past, missing a threat could have been fatal. If you failed to notice a snake or a storm, you might not survive. Missing a positive event, like a fruit tree or a safe shelter, was less dangerous. As a result, the brain evolved to prioritize negative signals. Modern life is different, but the same system still operates. This is why a harsh email from a boss can feel like a threat, even though it does not pose physical danger. The body reacts with stress hormones, preparing to fight or flee, even when the situation only involves words. This bias affects financial decisions as well. Investors tend to react more strongly to losses than to gains. If someone gains $100, they feel good for a short time. If they lose $100, the feeling of loss is much more intense and lasting. This imbalance can lead to overly cautious behavior. People might avoid risks that could bring long-term benefits because the fear of losing feels stronger than the hope of winning. In healthcare, negativity bias influences how patients respond to diagnoses and treatments. A patient might focus on the possible side effects of a medication rather than its benefits. Even if the chance of side effects is small, the negative information has a stronger impact. This can lead patients to refuse treatments that would help them, simply because the potential harm feels more real than the potential good. Social interactions are also shaped by this bias. Suppose you are at a party and meet 10 new people. 9 are friendly and kind, while 1 makes a rude comment. When you think back on the night, the rude encounter will likely stand out the most. It may even color how you remember the event as a whole. This happens because the brain gives more attention to threats, including social threats like rejection or criticism. Negativity bias can affect parenting. A child may receive praise for good behavior many times, but one instance of scolding may have a much stronger effect on their memory and emotions. Parents often notice that children seem more sensitive to criticism than to compliments. Over time, if a child hears too many negative messages, they may develop low self-esteem or anxiety, even if they also receive praise. In team settings, negativity spreads quickly. If one team member constantly complains, their negative energy can influence the whole group. Positive comments may not balance it out because they do not have the same weight. This is why leaders often work hard to prevent negativity from taking root. Once a negative mood spreads, it takes significant effort to restore balance. Consider a simple example from daily life. You receive 10 messages in one day. 9 are kind and supportive, but 1 is critical or rude. When you go to bed, the negative message is the one that replays in your mind. You may even forget the positive messages entirely. This shows how a single bad moment can outweigh multiple good ones. Because negativity bias is built into the brain, it cannot be eliminated completely. However, being aware of it helps people understand their reactions. When you notice that one piece of criticism feels overwhelming, you can pause and remind yourself of the full context. This awareness creates space to respond thoughtfully rather than letting the negative event control your feelings and decisions. Even though negative experiences have extra power, consciously focusing on positive ones can help bring balance and reduce the distortion caused by this bias. The halo effect happens when one positive trait of a person influences how we see everything else about them. When someone makes a good first impression, that impression spreads like a halo and colors all our other judgments. This means that if you notice one thing you like, you are more likely to assume that other parts of the person are also good, even without evidence. The effect works quietly in the background, shaping opinions without you realizing it. Physical appearance is one of the most common triggers of the halo effect. Imagine meeting someone who is very attractive. Because of their looks, you might automatically assume they are kind, intelligent, and capable, even though you have no proof of these qualities. This happens because the brain likes to keep things simple. It uses the information it already has, in this case attractiveness, and fills in the gaps with assumptions. Over time, those assumptions can influence how you treat the person and how you interpret their actions. A common scenario is in hiring decisions. Suppose a manager is interviewing candidates for a job. The first candidate is well-dressed, confident, and speaks smoothly. The manager immediately feels impressed. Later, when reviewing resumes, the manager might give more weight to that candidate's skills and experience, even if another applicant has stronger qualifications. The positive first impression acts like a filter, making every detail about the person seem better than it might actually be. This is why some companies use structured interviews and scoring systems to reduce bias. The halo effect also works in the opposite direction with negative traits, known as the horn effect. If someone has a quality that stands out as bad, like being late to a meeting, you might assume they are careless in other areas too. For example, if a coworker misses one deadline, you might start to believe they are unreliable in general, even if they meet every other deadline on time. Both the halo and horn effects show how a single characteristic can shape an overall opinion. In education, teachers often see the halo effect in grading. A student who speaks confidently in class and always turns in neat work might receive higher grades on essays, even if their writing is average. A teacher's positive impression of the student as hardworking or smart influences how they evaluate the assignments. This is not intentional, but it can affect fairness. Similarly, a quiet student who struggles to participate may have their work judged more harshly, even if it is of equal quality. Marketing relies heavily on this effect. A well-known celebrity endorsing a product brings their positive traits, like charm or popularity, to the brand. Consumers may assume that the product is high quality simply because they like the person promoting it. The actual features of the product become secondary to the emotional connection people have with the celebrity. This is why companies spend large amounts of money on endorsements. They are buying not just attention, but the halo that comes with it. Politics provides another clear example. A candidate who appears confident and charismatic during a debate can gain support even if their policies are unclear. Voters may assume that because the candidate seems strong and trustworthy, their ideas must also be good. The first impression takes over, and people may stop questioning the details. This can lead to decisions based on personality rather than substance. Consider a social situation. You meet someone at a party who is funny and engaging. You immediately like them and assume they are also trustworthy and reliable. Later, if they cancel plans or show up late, you are more likely to excuse their behavior because your overall view of them is positive. If someone you disliked did the same thing, you might judge it more harshly. The halo effect shapes not only first impressions, but also how you interpret later actions. The effect is powerful because it happens automatically. The brain processes huge amounts of information every second. To save energy, it uses shortcuts, and the halo effect is one of those shortcuts. When you have one strong piece of information, your brain uses it to predict other traits. This is efficient, but it can lead to distorted judgments. Retail environments are designed to trigger this bias. A store that looks clean and well organized makes you assume that the products are also high quality. Even if the actual items are no different from those in a messy store, your perception of them changes. The positive impression of the space spreads to everything inside it. Restaurants use the same principle. If the decor is stylish and the staff is polite, you may believe the food will taste better, even before you try it. The halo effect can also influence legal settings. A defendant who appears well-groomed and respectful in court may receive a lighter sentence than someone who looks disheveled or unfriendly, even if both cases are similar. Judges and juries are human, and their perceptions are shaped by the same unconscious biases as everyone else. This is why lawyers carefully plan how their clients present themselves during trials. In sports, the halo effect can lead to unequal treatment of athletes. A player with natural charisma or leadership qualities may receive more praise and playing time, even if another player has better performance statistics. Coaches and fans may see what they expect to see because their overall positive impression filters how they interpret behavior. This can affect careers and team dynamics. Parents sometimes experience the halo effect with their children. If one child is labeled as the responsible one, a parent might assume they always tell the truth and make good choices. Even when evidence suggests otherwise, the label sticks. Another child labeled as difficult may have their positive actions overlooked. These patterns can shape family relationships for years, influencing how siblings see themselves and each other. The workplace is full of subtle halos. Imagine a team member who is great at public speaking. Because of this skill, colleagues might assume they are also good at leadership, project management, and problem solving, even if they have never shown those abilities. When a new project arises, that person may be chosen to lead, simply because of the halo created by their speaking talent. This can lead to mismatched roles and missed opportunities for others. The effect can also show up in reverse. If a boss strongly dislikes one trait in an employee, like a lack of punctuality, they may start to judge all the employee's work negatively. Even high-quality contributions might be seen as flawed because the initial negative impression colors everything else. This demonstrates how fragile fairness can be when the halo or horn effect is in play. A common scenario that highlights this bias is in dating. When someone is physically attractive, their date might assume they are also kind, intelligent, and fun to be around. Red flags might be ignored because the positive first impression is so strong. Over time, this can lead to disappointment when reality does not match the assumptions made at the start. The halo effect explains why first impressions matter so much. When you meet someone for the first time, small details like a smile, tone of voice, or outfit can set the tone for how you see them later. Even if you gather more information over time, the initial impression can be difficult to change. This is why people often try to make a good first impression, knowing that it will shape how others view them in the long term. Being aware of the halo effect can help you slow down and question your assumptions. When you notice yourself forming a strong opinion based on one positive trait, you can pause and ask whether you have enough evidence to support your view. This extra step makes it easier to see people more accurately beyond the glow of that first impression.
The sunk cost fallacy happens when people keep putting time, money, or effort into something that is failing, simply because they have already invested in it. This behavior feels natural, but it is irrational. Past costs cannot be recovered, no matter what you do next. The only logical choice is to make decisions based on future outcomes. Yet, many people focus on what they have already spent and let it guide their choices, even when walking away would be smarter. Imagine you buy an expensive concert ticket. On the day of the show, you get sick. You know you will not enjoy the concert, but you tell yourself you must go because you paid for the ticket. The money is already gone whether you attend or not. Staying home would help you rest and recover, but going feels like getting your money's worth. This is a simple example of the sunk cost fallacy. The past cost pushes you to make a decision that does not benefit you in the future. This same pattern appears in larger situations. Companies often fall into this trap with projects. Suppose a business spends millions developing a new product. Halfway through, market research shows there is little demand for it. The rational choice would be to stop spending money and redirect resources to more promising ideas. Instead, leaders may continue funding the project because they feel too much has already been spent to quit. They hope that pushing forward will justify the earlier costs. In many cases, this leads to even bigger losses. Governments face similar challenges. A famous example is the continuation of wars or public works projects long after evidence shows they are failing. Leaders fear admitting that past spending was wasted. They keep committing resources, thinking, "We have already come this far, we cannot stop now." This thinking traps them in a cycle where good money follows bad, and citizens bear the consequences. The fallacy also appears in relationships. A person might stay in an unhealthy relationship because they have been with their partner for many years. They tell themselves that leaving would mean all those years were wasted. Instead of focusing on whether the relationship will bring happiness in the future, they dwell on the time and effort already spent. This focus keeps them stuck in a situation that no longer serves them. In education, students sometimes continue with a major they dislike because they have already completed several classes. They feel it would be a waste to start over, even though switching might lead to a better career and greater satisfaction. The past effort feels too valuable to abandon, even when staying the course will lead to long-term regret. This behavior is tied to human emotions. People dislike feeling that they have wasted resources. Quitting can feel like admitting failure, which creates discomfort and even shame. Continuing, even when it makes no sense, can feel like protecting one's past self from judgment. The mind prefers to avoid this painful feeling, so it chooses the path that seems to honor previous effort, even if it causes more harm in the future. The fallacy is strengthened by commitment and public perception. When someone has made a decision publicly, they may feel pressure to keep going so others will not see them as inconsistent or weak. A manager who promised success on a project might push ahead just to avoid embarrassment, even when data shows the project is doomed. This need to appear consistent to others can be stronger than the desire to make the best decision. Consider a scenario involving personal fitness. A person buys an expensive gym membership, but never enjoys going. Each month, they keep paying and forcing themselves to attend because they feel they must get value from their earlier payments. The money is already spent, but they continue to suffer instead of canceling the membership and finding an activity they actually like. In this case, the fallacy not only wastes money, but also reduces well-being. Entertainment decisions can also reveal this bias. Someone might sit through a bad movie simply because they paid for the ticket. Walking out would not bring the money back, but staying feels like salvaging the investment. In reality, leaving would save them from wasting more time on something they do not enjoy. The same logic applies to finishing a book you dislike or continuing a TV series that no longer interests you. Teens can fall victim to the fallacy when they confuse persistence with progress. Imagine a group of engineers building a new piece of technology. After months of work, they realize a key part of the design will never function properly. Instead of stopping, they keep trying to fix it because of the hours already invested. Each additional hour makes them even less willing to quit. They think about what they have put in rather than what they will get out. This mindset can lead to burnout and failure. The sunk cost fallacy is common in gambling. A gambler who has lost a large sum might keep betting in hopes of winning it back. They think, "I've already spent so much, I can't stop now." This often leads to even bigger losses. The rational choice would be to stop and accept the past loss, but the emotional desire to recover drives continued risk-taking. Friendships can also be affected. Someone might keep investing time and energy into a one-sided friendship because they have been friends for years. Even if the relationship no longer feels supportive, they stay because of shared history. The past effort makes them reluctant to let go, even when it would be healthier to move on. Large organizations face special dangers with this bias because decisions often involve many people. Once a project has consumed resources, it becomes harder to stop because no one wants to admit the mistake. Group dynamics can magnify the effect. Team members may convince each other to keep going, using phrases like, "We've already come so far," or "It would be a waste to quit now." These arguments focus on the past rather than the future, which is the core problem of the fallacy. Breaking free from the sunk cost fallacy requires shifting focus. Instead of asking, "How much have we already spent?" the better question is, "What will bring the best outcome from this point forward?" The past is gone and cannot be changed. Decisions should be based only on what happens next. For example, if a student realizes they dislike their chosen major, the logical step is to switch, even if it means starting over. Continuing just to avoid wasting earlier classes leads to a career they may regret. One way to see the fallacy clearly is to imagine the decision as starting fresh today. If you had no history with the situation, would you choose to continue? If the answer is no, then staying involved only because of past effort is a sign of the sunk cost fallacy. This perspective helps separate emotion from logic. Consider a couple renovating their house. Halfway through, they discover major structural problems. The cost to finish will be far higher than expected. They might feel compelled to keep going because of the money already spent. But if they were making the decision today, knowing all the facts, they might choose to sell the house instead. By viewing the choice as a fresh start, they can avoid throwing more money into a failing project. The sunk cost fallacy is deeply human because it touches on pride, hope, and fear. People want to believe their efforts matter. Walking away can feel like erasing part of their identity. Recognizing this bias does not make it easy to overcome, but it creates space to make better decisions. By focusing on future outcomes instead of past investments, individuals and groups can avoid being trapped by losses that cannot be undone. The social proof illusion happens when people look to others for cues about what to do, think, or believe. When many people behave in a certain way, it creates a strong signal that this behavior must be correct, safe, or popular. This tendency comes from a basic survival instinct. In early human history, following the group helped individuals stay safe. If everyone in the tribe ran from danger or gathered in one area for food, going along increased the chance of survival. Today, the same instinct operates, but instead of predators or shelter, it often applies to decisions about products, opinions, and trends. Imagine you are walking down a street and see two restaurants side by side. One is empty, while the other is full of people waiting to get in. Without knowing anything about the food, you are likely to assume the busy restaurant is better. The crowd acts as a signal of quality. Even if the food in the empty restaurant is just as good or better, the lack of customers makes it seem less appealing. This decision happens quickly, without deep thought. It feels safe to follow what many others have already chosen. Social proof plays a big role in marketing. Companies often use testimonials, reviews, and visible numbers to influence behavior. Seeing a product labeled bestseller makes people more likely to buy it, not because they have carefully compared options, but because they assume that many purchases mean it must be good. Online stores display star ratings and customer counts for this reason. A product with thousands of positive reviews creates a sense of safety. People think, if so many others liked it, it's probably the right choice. This shortcut saves time, but it can also lead to mistakes if the crowd is wrong or manipulated. Social media has amplified this effect. When a post has thousands of likes or shares, viewers assume it is important or true. This can spread both useful information and misinformation. A video or rumor that gains momentum can appear more credible simply because of its popularity. People may not stop to question the content. Instead, they take the reaction of others as evidence of truth. This creates a cycle where attention feeds more attention, regardless of accuracy. Consider a viral challenge online. One person posts a video doing something unusual, like pouring a bucket of ice water over their head. Others copy it, and soon millions are participating. Some join for fun, others for charity, and many simply because they see everyone else doing it. The behavior spreads quickly, not because each person has deeply considered it, but because the crowd provides a powerful signal that this is the thing to do. Social proof also influences decisions in emergencies. Imagine being in a crowded building when an alarm sounds. You are unsure whether to evacuate. If the people around you stay calm and remain seated, you are more likely to do the same. If they rush toward the exit, you are more likely to follow them without questioning. In these moments, watching others provides quick guidance when there is no time to analyze the situation. However, this can be dangerous if the crowd is wrong. A calm group might stay put during a real fire, or a panicked group might cause harm by stampeding. Businesses often exploit social proof intentionally. Limited time offers with labels like "only 3 left in stock" create urgency by showing that others are buying. Even if the limit is artificial, the message triggers a fear of missing out. Similarly, restaurants list certain dishes as most popular to steer choices. The popularity claim makes diners feel safe picking that option, even if it is not truly the best dish. This illusion also appears in workplace settings. During meetings, employees may stay quiet if they see that most people agree with a proposal. They assume the group must be correct, even if they have doubts. This is a form of groupthink, where the desire to fit in overpowers independent judgment. A single voice of dissent can break this pattern, but speaking up requires courage because it goes against the social signal. Fashion trends show how powerful social proof can be. When a celebrity wears a certain style, fans copy it. As more people adopt the look, it becomes a trend. The popularity itself becomes part of the appeal. People buy the item not only because they like it, but because they want to align with the group. When the trend fades, interest disappears just as quickly. The product's actual value did not change, only the social signal surrounding it. Politics and public opinion are shaped by similar forces. When a candidate draws large crowds or dominates news coverage, people perceive them as strong and popular. Voters may support the candidate simply because they seem like the winning choice. Poll numbers, whether accurate or not, can influence momentum. If people believe everyone else is backing a candidate, they may join in to avoid feeling left out. The social proof illusion can lead to poor decisions when the crowd is uninformed or misled. During the early days of a new technology, hype can create a rush of investment. If everyone is buying, individuals feel pressure to join in, even without understanding the product. This has happened with speculative bubbles in history, such as the dot-com boom or sudden rises in cryptocurrency prices. When the bubble bursts, many people lose money because their choices were based on following others rather than careful evaluation. A clear example of this happens in restaurants when a tip jar already contains some money. Even a few visible bills can encourage more tips. The sight of others contributing acts as proof that tipping is expected. If the jar were empty, some people might hesitate. The same principle applies to online fundraising platforms. A campaign with many donations appears trustworthy, which encourages even more donations. Tourist attractions rely on social proof too. Long lines outside a museum or theme park ride suggest that it is worth waiting for. Even if the line exists because of poor scheduling or a temporary delay, passers-by see it as a sign of value. They may join the line without knowing why it is long in the first place. This creates a feedback loop where the line itself generates more interest. In classrooms, students often look to their peers when unsure how to respond. If most students raise their hands to answer a question, others follow. If no one responds, individuals hesitate. Teachers who understand this can encourage participation by planting early positive responses, which then spread through the group. The desire to follow others comes from a need for belonging and safety. Being part of the group feels reassuring. Standing apart can feel risky, especially in public situations. This is why social proof is so effective in advertising and persuasion. Marketers know that people are more likely to act when they see others doing the same thing. Phrases like "join millions of satisfied customers" or "people just like you are using this service" are designed to trigger this instinct. Even reviews can be manipulated. A product might have thousands of positive ratings that were purchased or generated by bots. Shoppers assume the numbers reflect genuine approval, so they buy without further research. Later, they may discover the product is low quality. By then, the company has already profited from the illusion of popularity. In daily life, the social proof illusion can be subtle. If you walk into a meeting and everyone is checking their phones, you are likely to pull out your phone too. The behavior spreads without discussion. Similarly, if you see a group laughing, you may smile even before you know the joke. The actions of others create a context that shapes your own actions automatically. Understanding this illusion helps explain why trends rise and fall so quickly. Once the social signal fades, the behavior stops. People move on to the next popular thing, because the underlying force was never about personal preference alone. It was about the safety and comfort of following the group. By recognizing when you are acting based on others rather than your own judgment, you can make decisions that truly fit your needs instead of simply copying the crowd. Authority bias happens when people are more likely to believe or obey someone who appears to be in a position of power. This effect can lead to decisions and actions that individuals might not take on their own. The presence of authority changes how people think and behave, often without them realizing it. Humans have evolved to rely on leaders for guidance. In groups, following a leader can create order and improve survival. Over time, this tendency has become automatic. Today, it shows up in workplaces, schools, governments, and even everyday interactions. The famous Milgram obedience experiment is one of the clearest demonstrations of authority bias. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand why ordinary people followed harmful orders during events like World War II. In his study, participants were told they were helping with research on learning. They were instructed to give electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered a question incorrectly. The shocks were not real, but the participants did not know this. A man in a lab coat representing authority, encouraged them to continue even when the person being shocked screamed in pain. Most participants obeyed, even when they were visibly uncomfortable. Many delivered what they believed to be dangerous, even deadly shocks, simply because the authority figure told them to. When asked later why they did it, they said they felt they had no choice or that the man in charge knew better. This experiment revealed how powerful authority bias can be. People often set aside their own judgment and values when someone with perceived power gives an order. Authority bias appears in workplaces all the time. Imagine a company meeting where a CEO announces a new strategy. Even if employees have doubts, they may stay silent or even agree because they assume the CEO must be right. The CEO's position carries weight, making it difficult for others to challenge ideas. This can lead to poor decisions when those in charge are wrong, but no one speaks up. In some cases, entire teams or organizations fail because authority went unquestioned. Medical settings provide another example. Patients often trust doctors completely, which can be helpful but also risky. If a doctor makes a mistake, patients may not question it because they assume the doctor's knowledge is superior. In emergencies, this trust can save lives. However, it can also lead to harm if a patient follows instructions blindly. Nurses and other staff can experience the same pressure. If a senior doctor gives an order that seems incorrect, they may hesitate to challenge it out of respect for hierarchy. Authority bias influences consumer behavior too. Advertisers often use actors dressed as scientists or professionals to endorse products. Even when the person is not a real expert, their appearance creates a sense of authority. Viewers are more likely to believe claims made by someone in a lab coat or uniform. This tactic works because people associate authority with accuracy and safety, even when there is no actual expertise behind the message. A courtroom shows how deeply this bias runs. Jurors tend to trust testimony from police officers or expert witnesses more than from ordinary people. The uniform, title, or credentials signal authority, which can sway judgment. Even when evidence is equal, the perception of authority can tip the balance. This has serious implications for justice, as it means decisions can be influenced by appearance rather than facts. Consider a scenario in everyday life. A group of friends is lost while hiking. One person speaks confidently and takes the lead, claiming to know the right path. Even if others are unsure, they are likely to follow. The leader's tone and confidence act as signals of authority. If the leader is wrong, the entire group may end up in danger. Without this bias, the group might pause, discuss options, and make a better choice together. Authority bias is not always negative. In many cases, following authority makes life easier. People cannot be experts in everything, so they rely on leaders and specialists for guidance. For instance, trusting a pilot to fly a plane or a firefighter to give evacuation instructions is both necessary and practical. Problems arise when this trust is applied blindly, without considering whether the authority is correct or acting in good faith. History provides many examples of this bias leading to harm. In business scandals, employees sometimes go along with unethical practices because their bosses approve of them. They assume that if leadership says it is okay, it must be acceptable. In extreme cases, this mindset has contributed to financial collapses, environmental disasters, and public health crises. The desire to obey authority can override personal morals and common sense. Authority bias is strengthened by symbols and signals. Titles, uniforms, and formal language all increase the effect. A person introduced as doctor or professor automatically receives more respect.
The same idea, said by someone without a title, might be ignored. Similarly, physical symbols like badges or logos trigger deference. These signals do not guarantee that the person is correct, but they influence how others respond. An experiment showed how easily this can happen. Researchers asked people to cross a busy street against the light. When an ordinary person made the request, cue followed. When someone dressed in a suit and tie made the same request, far more people complied. The clothing created a perception of authority, even though the situation was the same. This shows how small cues can change behavior dramatically. Authority bias can be seen in classrooms as well. Students often accept what a teacher says without question, even when it conflicts with other information. The teacher's role as authority shapes the student's beliefs. While this trust is useful for learning, it can also limit critical thinking. Encouraging questions and discussion helps reduce the effect by balancing respect with independent thought. In health and safety campaigns, authority bias is sometimes used deliberately. Governments may use respected figures like doctors or community leaders to share messages about vaccinations or emergency procedures, because people are more likely to follow trusted authorities. These campaigns can save lives. The challenge is ensuring that the information given is accurate and not misleading. A classic workplace example involves a factory floor. A supervisor instructs workers to speed up production to meet a deadline, even though safety procedures require a slower pace. Workers know the rule, but comply with the supervisor's order because they feel pressure from authority. If an accident occurs, the decision to obey rather than question authority becomes clear. This dynamic highlights why safety programs emphasize speaking up, even to those in charge. Authority bias is especially strong when the situation is unclear. When people are uncertain, they seek guidance from those who seem knowledgeable. This is why crises often increase the power of leaders. In a disaster, citizens look to government officials for direction. If the information is accurate, this trust helps coordinate a response. If it is wrong, the consequences can be widespread and damaging. The Milgram experiment remains a powerful reminder of how far this bias can go. Participants were ordinary people, not cruel or aggressive by nature. Yet most were willing to cause harm because an authority figure told them to. This finding shows that under the right conditions, anyone can be influenced by authority. Recognizing this does not mean rejecting all leaders. Instead, it means staying aware of the bias and asking questions when instructions conflict with personal judgment or evidence. One way to reduce authority bias is to pause before acting. When given a directive, especially one that feels wrong, it helps to ask, would I make this choice if the order came from someone without authority? If the answer is no, it may be worth seeking clarification or voicing concern. This approach separates the decision from the influence of power, making it easier to focus on what is truly right or effective. Authority bias will always exist because it is part of human nature. People need guidance, and authority provides structure. The challenge is to balance respect for leaders with independent thinking. By staying aware of this bias, individuals can avoid blindly following and instead make thoughtful choices based on facts and values.
The bandwagon effect happens when people adopt a belief or behavior simply because many others are doing it. Popularity itself becomes a signal of value. When something seems widely accepted, it feels safer and more appealing to join in, even without fully understanding why. This effect is rooted in human psychology. Throughout history, belonging to a group has been important for survival. Standing apart from the group could mean danger or exclusion. As a result, people developed a natural tendency to follow the crowd. In modern life, This instinct often shows up in decisions about products, opinions, and trends. Imagine a new restaurant opens in your neighborhood. At first, you know nothing about the quality of the food, but one evening, you walk by and see a long line of people waiting to get in. You immediately assume it must be worth trying. The crowd itself creates the impression that the restaurant is good. Even if the food is average, the appearance of popularity draws more customers. The more people who join the line, the stronger the effect becomes. This creates a cycle where popularity feeds on itself, regardless of actual quality. Social media amplifies this effect. A post with thousands of likes or shares appears more credible and interesting than one with only a few. People are more likely to engage with content that seems popular because they assume others have already vetted it. This can spread both useful information and false or harmful ideas. A rumor or misleading claim can go viral simply because so many people are repeating it. The number of voices saying something gives the illusion of truth, even when there is no solid evidence. Consider the rise of certain products that become cultural phenomena. A new gadget hits the market, and early adopters share videos and reviews. As more people see others using it, demand grows. Soon, it feels like everyone has one, and those who don't may feel left out. This pressure pushes more people to buy, not necessarily because the product meets a real need, but because owning it signals belonging. Fads in clothing, toys, or technology often follow this pattern. The original quality of the item matters less than the social signal created by widespread adoption. The bandwagon effect also shows up in politics. When a candidate appears to have strong support, undecided voters may join in because they want to back a winner. Poll numbers play a big role here. If surveys show that one candidate is leading, people may shift their votes toward that person, assuming the majority must be correct. This can create momentum that changes the outcome of an election. The perception of popularity becomes as powerful as actual policies or performance. This effect is visible in financial markets as well. When a stock starts to rise, investors notice the upward trend. More people buy in, pushing the price even higher. At a certain point, individuals may purchase shares simply because everyone else seems to be doing it. The price may no longer reflect the true value of the company, but the collective behavior keeps driving it upward. This can lead to bubbles, where prices grow rapidly and then collapse when confidence fades. Group settings magnify the bandwagon effect. Imagine a team meeting where the leader suggests a new strategy. One person voices support, then another, and soon everyone is agreeing. Individuals who had doubts may stay quiet because it seems like everyone else is on board. The appearance of consensus discourages dissent. This dynamic can lead to groupthink, where critical thinking is replaced by conformity. The decision feels correct because so many people agree, even if the reasoning is flawed. The entertainment industry often relies on this effect. A movie that has a strong opening weekend draws more viewers in the following weeks. People want to see what others are talking about, and the buzz creates a sense of importance. Awards and bestseller lists work the same way. A book labeled as a bestseller attracts more readers, partly because they believe that popularity signals quality. Even if individual readers do not personally enjoy it, the label encourages them to give it a try. The bandwagon effect can influence everyday choices in subtle ways. When dining out with friends, you might choose a dish simply because others at the table ordered it. If everyone praises a particular TV show, you may start watching it, even if it's not your usual taste. The pull of the group makes you less likely to evaluate the choice independently. You assume that if many people like something, it must be worth your time. This effect is particularly strong in situations of uncertainty. When you lack information, watching what others do provides a shortcut. For example, if you are visiting a foreign city and need to find a good place to eat, you might pick the restaurant that seems busiest.
Without detailed knowledge, the crowd becomes a substitute for research. This shortcut often works, but can also lead you astray if the crowd is misinformed or simply following its own signals. Marketers use this instinct deliberately. Phrases like, "join thousands of happy customers," or "millions sold worldwide," are designed to trigger the bandwagon effect. Seeing evidence of popularity makes potential buyers feel more confident. Limited time offers with messages like, "everyone is buying now," add urgency by suggesting that others are already taking action. The goal is to create a sense that choosing the product is not just smart, but socially validated. The effect can also be manipulated online. Companies sometimes buy fake followers, likes, or reviews to create the appearance of popularity. When real users see these numbers, they may assume the product or account is trustworthy and join in. Over time, the fake numbers can lead to genuine growth as the illusion of popularity becomes self-sustaining. Peer pressure is a direct form of the bandwagon effect. In schools, children and teenagers often adopt behaviors or styles to fit in with their peers. A certain brand of shoes or type of music becomes popular, and those who want to belong follow along. Even when they do not personally like the trend, the desire for acceptance is strong enough to override individual preferences. Adults experience similar pressure in workplaces or social circles, though it may be less obvious. The bandwagon effect can lead to missed opportunities when it discourages independent thinking. Imagine an employee who has an innovative idea but stays silent because everyone else supports the current plan. Later, the team discovers that the popular plan failed and the unspoken idea might have succeeded. The need to conform prevented valuable input from surfacing. Elections provide clear examples of this bias. During campaign season, candidates who draw large crowds or dominate media coverage appear more legitimate. Voters who are unsure may interpret the enthusiasm as proof of worthiness. This effect is so strong that some campaigns focus heavily on creating the appearance of momentum through rallies, advertisements, and social media activity. The actual policies may matter less than the sense of being part of a winning movement. Sports fans experience the bandwagon effect when they support a team simply because it is winning. During championship seasons, casual fans suddenly appear, wearing team colors and attending games. If the team starts losing, their support fades. These bandwagon fans are not deeply invested in the sport itself. Their participation is driven by the excitement of being associated with a popular winner. A clear way to see this effect is through sudden market trends, like collectible toys or fashion crazes. At first, a few people adopt the item. As others notice, demand grows. Eventually, the product becomes so popular that scarcity drives even more interest. People rush to buy, not because they need or want the item deeply, but because everyone else is doing it. When the trend fades, those same people may wonder why they cared so much. The bandwagon effect is powerful because it taps into a fundamental human need to belong. Popularity offers a shortcut to decision-making, especially when choices feel complex or uncertain, but it can also cloud judgment. When many voices say the same thing, it feels safe to join them, even if the belief or behavior is flawed. Recognizing when you are following the crowd simply because it seems popular creates space to pause and consider whether the choice truly fits your own values and needs.
Groupthink happens when members of a group value agreement and harmony more than honest debate or careful analysis. This desire to keep the group united can cause people to ignore warning signs, avoid disagreement, and go along with ideas they know are flawed. The result is often poor decisions that no one would have made alone. Groupthink is not about bad intentions. It is about social pressure and the natural human need to belong. People want to be accepted by their peers, and sometimes that need outweighs the need to be correct or to make the best choice. Imagine a team at work tasked with developing a new product. In the first meeting, the manager suggests a bold strategy. A few team members have concerns, but stay silent because everyone else seems excited. They worry about being seen as negative or difficult. As the discussion continues, the silence of those with doubts is interpreted as agreement. Soon, the whole team appears united. The project moves forward even though no one has carefully examined the risks. When problems arise later, everyone wonders why no one spoke up earlier. This dynamic plays out in many settings. In politics, groupthink can lead to major failures. A famous example is the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, US. Government leaders planned an attack on Cuba using flawed intelligence and unrealistic assumptions. Many participants had private doubts, but kept quiet to maintain loyalty to the president and avoid conflict. The invasion ended in disaster, costing lives and damaging credibility. Later analysis showed that the decision-making process was deeply flawed because critical voices were suppressed. Groupthink is common in corporate boardrooms. Consider a company planning to launch a new product line. The CEO strongly supports the idea, and other executives are eager to show support. As a result, they focus on positive projections and ignore negative data. Lower-level employees who see problems may not feel safe speaking up. Even when early signs of trouble appear, the group continues down the same path. By the time reality catches up, the company has invested millions in a product that customers do not want. The core problem of groupthink is that it replaces independent thought with conformity. Instead of asking, what is the best decision based on the facts? Members think, how can I fit in and avoid conflict? This shift changes how information is shared and interpreted. People stop offering alternative ideas or challenging assumptions. They may even convince themselves that doubts are wrong or unimportant. Over time, the group becomes more confident while actually becoming less accurate. Certain conditions make groupthink more likely. A strong, directive leader can unintentionally pressure others to agree. When one voice dominates, others may feel their role is simply to support rather than question. A lack of diversity in the group also increases risk. If everyone has similar backgrounds or experiences, they are more likely to think alike and miss other perspectives. High stress can amplify the effect. In a crisis, people may rush to reach agreement quickly, mistaking speed for effectiveness. Social dynamics play a big role. Nobody likes being the lone dissenter. When everyone else seems united, speaking up feels risky. This fear of rejection or punishment keeps people quiet. Sometimes members even police themselves, avoiding thoughts that go against the group's direction. They may downplay their own doubts to protect their sense of belonging. A classic experiment showed how easily this happens. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted studies where participants were asked to compare line lengths. When actors in the group deliberately gave wrong answers, many real participants went along, even when the correct answer was obvious. This demonstrated how powerful the urge to conform can be, even in simple, low-stakes situations. In real-world decisions with higher stakes, the effect can be much stronger. Groupthink can appear in everyday situations. Imagine friends deciding where to go for dinner. One person suggests a place they like. Others have different preferences, but say nothing to avoid conflict. Everyone ends up eating somewhere that only one person truly wanted. While this is a small example, it reflects the same process: silence mistaken for agreement, leading to a subpar outcome. In larger groups, the consequences can be severe. Engineering teams designing complex systems, like bridges or airplanes, must be especially careful. If a junior engineer notices a flaw but stays silent because senior engineers seem confident, the mistake can lead to catastrophic failure. Safety depends on open communication and a culture where questioning is encouraged. Groupthink also affects social movements and public opinion. When a particular belief becomes dominant, people may adopt it without questioning, simply because everyone around them seems to agree. This can lead to sudden shifts in behavior, such as mass participation in trends or protests. While unity can be powerful, it can also spread misinformation or lead to extreme actions if no one pauses to examine the facts. The role of leadership is crucial. Leaders who discourage dissent create fertile ground for groupthink. A leader who punishes disagreement, even subtly, sends a signal that harmony is more important than truth. On the other hand, leaders who actively invite criticism and alternative viewpoints can reduce the risk. When people know it is safe to speak up, they are more likely to share valuable insights, even if those insights challenge the group's current direction. Consider a hospital team during surgery. The lead surgeon gives instructions confidently. A nurse notices something unusual, but hesitates to speak because the surgeon seems certain. If the nurse stays silent and the issue is serious, the patient's safety is at risk. Hospitals now train staff to use clear, direct communication to prevent this problem. Everyone, regardless of rank, is encouraged to speak up about potential errors. This practice shows how awareness of groupthink can save lives. Groupthink often begins subtly, early in a project. People may feel free to share ideas. Over time, as the group narrows its focus, dissenting voices fade. The group becomes insulated, listening only to itself. Outside perspectives are ignored or dismissed as irrelevant. This isolation creates a false sense of certainty. Members may believe they are united because their idea is strong, when in reality, they are united because no one dares to challenge it. A telling sign of groupthink is the illusion of unanimity. Silence is interpreted as agreement. If no one raises objections, members assume everyone supports the decision. This perception builds confidence, even when underlying doubts remain. The problem is that silence often hides fear, not consent. Without explicit checks, the group may never discover how many members actually have concerns. Preventing groupthink requires deliberate effort. One approach is to assign a devil's advocate whose job is to question assumptions and present opposing views. This makes disagreement a formal part of the process. Another approach is to seek outside input. People who are not part of the group can offer fresh perspectives and identify blind spots. Anonymous feedback can also help. When individuals can share concerns without fear of backlash, they are more likely to speak honestly. In a business context, successful teams often schedule time to revisit decisions. By pausing to reflect, they create space for reconsideration. This helps prevent the momentum of groupthink from carrying them too far down the wrong path. Ultimately, groupthink happens because humans value connection. Being part of a group feels good and safe. Conflict feels uncomfortable. This emotional pull can override rational thinking. By understanding how groupthink works, people can create environments where open dialogue is not just allowed, but expected. The goal is not endless disagreement, but informed decisions made with all voices heard. When groups balance harmony with honest debate, they can avoid the silent trap that leads to collective mistakes. A false consensus effect is the tendency to believe that other people think and act the same way we do. It makes us overestimate how common our own beliefs, habits, or opinions are. This happens because our perspective feels normal to us, so we assume it must be normal for others as well. While this shortcut helps the brain make quick judgments about social situations, it can lead to misunderstandings, conflict, and poor decision-making. Imagine you are at work discussing a new policy. You dislike the policy and think it will create problems. Because you feel strongly about it, you assume most of your coworkers agree. When you speak up in a meeting, you expect others to back you. Instead, you are surprised to find that many of them support the policy. Your assumption about their opinions was wrong. You fell into the false consensus effect by projecting your own view onto the group. This mismatch can create tension, especially if you react as though others are wrong for disagreeing. This effect shows up in everyday choices too. Suppose you like a particular kind of food and believe it is clearly the best option. When planning a dinner with friends, you might assume everyone else feels the same way. You choose the restaurant without asking for input, only to discover that others dislike that type of food. Your assumption created an awkward situation because you overestimated how widely your preference was shared. One reason the false consensus effect happens is that people spend most of their time with others who are similar to them. Friends, family members, and coworkers often share certain values or lifestyles. This creates a bubble where certain ideas seem universal. For example, if everyone in your social circle enjoys running, you might believe that most people like running. In reality, your circle is not representative of the larger population. Your personal experience becomes the lens through which you see the world, and it skews your perception of how common certain behaviors or beliefs are. Media and online platforms can intensify this bias. Social media feeds are designed to show you content that matches your interests and opinions. If you believe strongly in a political issue, your feed will likely contain posts from people who agree with you. Over time, it can start to feel like everyone shares your view. When you encounter someone who disagrees, their opinion may seem strange or even wrong, because it clashes with the reality you have been seeing every day. This is one reason online arguments can become heated so quickly. Both sides believe their perspective is the obvious majority, which makes compromise difficult. The false consensus effect can also affect workplace decisions. Imagine a manager planning a change in company policy. Because they see their own ideas as reasonable and normal, they assume employees will see them the same way. They launch the new policy without gathering feedback. When resistance arises, the manager is shocked. Their failure to account for different viewpoints leads to frustration on both sides. This example shows how the effect can create practical problems, not just misunderstandings. In marketing and business, companies sometimes misjudge their customers because of this bias. Executives may assume that customers want the same things they do. A team that loves cutting-edge technology might believe that everyone values innovation above all else. They design products based on this assumption, only to find that customers actually prefer simplicity, your lower prices. By projecting their own preferences onto others, the company misreads the market and loses money. The false consensus effect is visible in politics. People often assume that their political beliefs are shared by most others. This can make election results surprising and upsetting. For instance, a person living in a city where almost everyone supports one candidate might believe that candidate is guaranteed to win. When the actual vote shows a different outcome, it feels like a shock. The individual misjudged the broader population because their personal environment gave them a limited view. This bias also shows up in conflict between individuals. Suppose two roommates are deciding how to keep their apartment clean. One assumes that certain chores are obvious and will be done without discussion. The other does not share these expectations. Because they never talked about it, both believe the other person is ignoring clear rules. In reality, the rules were never shared. Each person thought their own habits were universal. This misunderstanding can cause resentment over time. Even small actions are influenced by this effect. Imagine a person who always recycles. They might assume everyone around them does the same. When they see someone throw a can in the trash, they feel angry and judge the person harshly. From their perspective, recycling is a basic and obvious behavior. They do not consider that others may have different habits or priorities. This lack of perspective can make interactions less compassionate and more judgmental. The false consensus effect can lead to poor decision-making in groups. When everyone assumes their opinion is the majority, they may not speak up to confirm it. For example, during a meeting, several people might dislike a proposed plan, but stay silent because they believe everyone else supports it. As a result, the plan moves forward without real consensus. This dynamic is similar to groupthink, but in this case, the error comes from assuming agreement rather than actively seeking harmony. Research has shown that this bias affects self-esteem. When people engage in behaviors they consider negative, like skipping exercise or eating junk food, they often assume others do the same. This helps them feel better about their choices. For example, someone who procrastinates on a project might think everyone puts things off sometimes. Whether or not this is true, the belief provides comfort by normalizing their behavior. The reverse is also true. When people have positive habits or beliefs, they assume others share them, which can lead to disappointment when they discover this is not the case. A person who values honesty might believe that everyone else is equally truthful. When they encounter dishonesty, they feel shocked and hurt. Their expectation was based on a false assumption rather than an accurate understanding of others. The false consensus effect plays a role in social tension. When groups believe their views are widely shared, they may dismiss or attack opposing views. This can lead to polarization, where each side sees the other as a small minority, even when both are large and significant. Public debates become more hostile because each group feels certain that it represents the majority. Consider a real-world example involving health decisions. During a flu season, some people may assume that most of their friends are getting vaccinated because they believe it is the obvious choice. Others may assume the opposite, believing that few people bother with vaccines. Both groups act on their assumptions, which may or may not match reality. Public health campaigns must address these mismatched perceptions by providing clear, accurate data rather than relying on assumptions about behavior. This bias can even affect how people interpret silence. If you share an opinion and no one disagrees, you might take that as agreement. In truth, others may simply be too polite or uncertain to speak up. Their silence reinforces your belief that everyone thinks like you. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where assumptions are never challenged. Understanding the false consensus effect requires recognizing that your view of the world is shaped by your experiences and environment. It is natural to see your beliefs as normal, but it is also important to remember that others have different experiences. By asking questions and listening carefully, you can uncover differences instead of assuming agreement. This awareness can reduce misunderstandings, improve communication, and help build stronger, more realistic connections with others. The spotlight effect is the tendency to believe that other people are paying much more attention to us than they actually are. It makes us think our actions, appearance, or mistakes are under constant scrutiny, like we are standing in a bright spotlight on a stage. In reality, most people are focused on their own lives and worries. This bias can cause unnecessary stress, embarrassment, and hesitation in social situations. It creates a distorted sense of how much others notice or care about what we do. Imagine you spill a drink on your shirt at a party. You feel like everyone in the room must be staring and judging you. You spend the rest of the evening trying to hide the stain, convinced that it is the only thing people will remember. In truth, most guests barely notice or quickly forget about it. They are too busy thinking about themselves, their conversations. or how they are being perceived. What feels like a major event to you barely registers in their minds. This happens because our own perspective dominates our thinking. We are always aware of what we are doing and how we look, so it is easy to assume others have the same level of awareness. The brain struggles to step outside of itself and imagine how little space we occupy in other people's thoughts. Research shows that this effect is strong even in simple situations. In one experiment, participants were asked to wear a t-shirt with an embarrassing image and walk into a room of strangers. They predicted that half the people would notice and remember the shirt. In reality, only a small fraction did. The participants greatly overestimated how much attention they attracted. The spotlight effect can shape behavior in many areas of life. In classrooms, students may avoid raising their hands because they fear saying something wrong in front of others. They imagine their mistake will seem huge and unforgettable. In reality, classmates are usually focused on their own worries, like understanding the lesson or preparing their own answers. Even if someone does notice the mistake, they are unlikely to dwell on it. This bias also appears in public speaking. Many people dread giving presentations because they picture the audience analyzing every word and gesture. They believe that one stumble or awkward pause will ruin the entire impression. In truth, audiences are often distracted, tired, or thinking about unrelated matters. Most listeners remember only the main points, not the small imperfections. The speaker's fear comes from overestimating how much others are watching and judging. The spotlight effect influences how we dress and present ourselves. Before a social event, you might spend hours worrying about what to wear, fearing that others will notice if your outfit is slightly wrong. Once you arrive, you assume everyone is paying attention to your clothes. In reality, most people are focused on their own appearance or conversations. They may not even notice what you are wearing, unless it is extremely unusual. This explains why people often cannot remember what others were wearing the day before, even close friends or coworkers. The fear of being judged can lead to missed opportunities. Someone might avoid joining a dance class, giving a speech, or trying a new hobby because they believe others will notice their lack of skill and laugh. This belief holds them back, even though most observers are either supportive or indifferent. The imagined judgment is far harsher than the real one. The spotlight effect can also make small mistakes seem like disasters. Imagine tripping on a sidewalk in a busy area. You feel like everyone saw and is laughing at you. You replay the moment in your mind for hours. In truth, most passerby barely noticed or forgot immediately. Even if a few people saw, they likely empathized because they have had similar experiences. Your embarrassment lasts far longer than anyone else's attention. Social media can intensify this bias. Posting a photo or comment online can feel like exposing yourself to a massive audience. You may imagine that everyone is analyzing your words or appearance. While some people may notice, most are scrolling quickly and focused on their own posts. The sense of being in a spotlight grows stronger online because numbers like likes and views seem to confirm that you are under observation. In reality, many interactions are brief and casual, not deeply judgmental. The spotlight effect is especially common among teenagers and young adults. During these years, people are forming their identities and are highly sensitive to peer approval. A teenager might believe that everyone at school notices a small blemish or awkward moment. This belief can create anxiety and self-conscious behavior. Over time, most people realize that others are less focused on them than they imagined, but the bias never fully disappears. Workplace situations also reveal this effect. An employee who makes a minor error, like sending an email with a typo, may assume their boss and coworkers are judging them harshly. They might replay the mistake repeatedly, feeling it defines their reputation. In reality, most coworkers are too busy with their own tasks to give it much thought. The error matters far less to others than to the person who made it. Understanding this bias can reduce stress. When you catch yourself worrying about how others perceive you, it helps to remember that most people are absorbed in their own lives. They have their own concerns, insecurities, and plans. This does not mean they never notice you, but their attention is fleeting. Even if they do notice, they are unlikely to judge as harshly as you fear. Consider a group photo. When people look at the picture, their first focus is almost always on themselves. They check how they look before paying attention to others. This simple behavior shows how self-focused people naturally are. If everyone is busy thinking about their own image, they have little time to analyze yours. The spotlight effect can also work in reverse. Sometimes, people assume their positive actions are more visible than they are. For example, an employee who stayed late to finish a project may believe their effort was obvious to the entire team. When no one mentions it, they feel unappreciated. In truth, others may not have noticed or may not know the details. This misunderstanding comes from overestimating how closely others are paying attention. The bias can affect relationships. After a disagreement, you might believe the other person is still focused on your mistake or harsh words. You assume they are thinking about it as much as you are. In many cases, they have already moved on or are more concerned about how they were perceived. Each person is caught in their own spotlight, which makes mutual understanding harder. In competitive environments, the spotlight effect can create performance anxiety. Musicians or performers may feel like every small error is magnified in the eyes of the audience. This pressure can interfere with performance. Experienced professionals often learn to counteract this bias by focusing on their task rather than the imagined judgment of others. One practical way to test the spotlight effect is to recall times when you noticed someone else's small mistake. Perhaps a friend stumbled over a word or wore mismatched socks. How long did you think about it? Probably only a few seconds before moving on. Realizing how quickly you forget others' errors can help you see how little they dwell on yours. The spotlight effect persists because it is difficult to step outside of your own perspective. Your experiences, thoughts, and feelings are always at the center of your awareness. It takes effort to remember that others are just as focused on themselves. By recognizing this bias, you can take social risks with more confidence, knowing that most people are not watching as closely as you imagine.